Well, good morning. Good morning, ladies. What's that?
Can we have order?
Good morning. The Senate Armed Services Committee meets this morning to receive testimony on the U.S. strategy in the Middle East and efforts to counter so-called Islamic State. I thank our distinguished witnesses for appearing before us this morning and for their continued service to our nation during a time of war. Please convey the gratitude and appreciation of this committee to all the men and women you lead. Since our witnesses last appeared before this committee, we have seen a steady increase in operational activity in Iraq and Syria. Airstrikes have steadily increased and improved. New capabilities such as the A-10 and now attack helicopters have gradually been added. Efforts to train and equip vetted Syrian forces have been restarted and slowly expanded. And additional U.S. troops have been periodically deployed to the fight, a few dozen and a few hundred at a time. These operational adjustments have resulted in some operational gains. We have seen Iraqi security forces make modest gains against ISIL in Anbar province, and a coalition of Syrian Kurds with small numbers of Sunni Arabs take territory away from ISIL across parts of northern Syria. All the while, United States and coalition special operation forces continue their daily degrading of ISIL fighters in Iraq and Syria. These gains are real and encouraging and testify to the excellence of our military leaders and troops on the ground. The purpose of this hearing is certainly to review those operational issues, but more importantly, put them into some strategic context. Too often, it seems, policymakers, politicians, and the media all want to engage at the operational level. I understand. Military operations are important and interesting, but I worry that we're staring at our challenges in the broader Middle East through soda straws. We need to lift our sights. At a more strategic level, we see a Middle East descending into chaos. In the words of Henry Kissinger, and I quote, "There's a struggle for power within states, a conflict between states, a conflict between ethnic and religious groups, and an assault on the international system." While the epicenter of this conflict for power and identity is in Iraq and Syria, attack plotting, all the warning signs that existed in Afghanistan on September 10, 2001. The administration increasingly appears focused on this problem, but once again, the response has been reactive, slow, and insufficient. Similarly with Russia. Last year, Vladimir Putin moved to fill a strategic vacuum that the United States has left in the Middle East in its first out-of-country military since the time of the Tsars. Russian forces moved into Syria, doubled down on the Assad regime, and decimated the moderate Syrian opposition groups that America and our allies said we were supporting. Russia has used Syria as a live-fire exercise for its modernizing military. Despite predictions of a Russian quagmire, Putin has instead used limited military means to achieve distinct political goals. Despite Putin's pledged withdrawal from Syria, Assad's forces, backed by Russia, now appear poised to retake Aleppo. Meanwhile, advanced Russian military capabilities remain in Syria, enhancing Putin's ability to project power beyond the region. Once again, the U.S. response has appeared confused, reactive, and inadequate. None of this is happening because our adversaries are 10 feet tall or somehow more capable than us. Instead, as sophisticated and ruthless as ISIL is, it has major strategic vulnerabilities, not least the resentment it engenders among the very Muslim communities it seeks to oppress. Vladimir Putin is playing a weak hand economically and demographically, but he is consistently playing it better than we are playing ours. So too with the Iranian regime. Even with a windfall of sanctions relief, Tehran remains militarily and economically weak, but it is aggressively expanding its malign influence and subverting our long-term partners. Put simply, too many of our leaders appear involved in the tactical fight. the incremental calibration and escalation of military operations, and not enough in the strategic fight. And despite the real tactical gains we have made, we must ask ourselves, is this working? Are we winning? Are we getting ahead of the threats and problems we face? Or are they getting ahead of us? What enduring objectives do we hope to achieve across the Middle East, a region that is experiencing greater turmoil than at any time since the collapse of the Ottoman Empire? How will we achieve those goals, and on what timeline and at what cost? I understand the American people are frustrated with Washington. I know there's a belief out there that we invaded and occupied Iraq and it failed, that we intervened but did not occupy Libya and it failed, and that we did not intervene in Syria and that failed too. But what ties all of this together is that we left. We left, or we never engaged in the first place. We pulled away and stood back and tried to convince ourselves that everything would be all right. And look at the result. No new order has emerged in the Middle East, only chaos. And the vacuum we left behind has been filled by the most extreme and anti-American of forces, ISIL, Al-Qaeda, Iran, and its terrorist proxies, and now Russia. We cannot afford to believe that this is not our problem. It is our problem. As General David Petraeus wrote last week, quote, "The attacks and other activities of extremists will not be confined to the areas or regions in which they are located. Rather, as in the case of Syria, the actions of the extremist groups are likely to spew instability, extremism, violence, and refugees far beyond surroundings. We cannot go on pretending that we can avoid these problems, or that the current approach of trying to treat the symptoms of the disease rather than its cause will work if only we give it more time. It will not. We need to stop fixating on military details and look at the bigger picture. No one believes there are easy solutions to the underlying problems in the Middle East, but after the past 7 years, much should be clear. Walking away isn't the answer, and time is not on our side. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me join you in welcoming Secretary Carter and General Dunford. Gentlemen, thank you for your service to the nation and your presence here today. This morning's hearing to update the committee on the status of coalition military operations against the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL, is especially timely. It comes on the heels of visits to the region by the President, Secretary Kerry, and both of you as part of the administration's continuing review of our ongoing efforts as part of Operation Inherent Resolve. We look forward to hearing your assessment of the situation on the ground, the progress that has been made to date, and the military tasks that can be accomplished in the months ahead. In recent days, the Department has announced 2 deployments, one each for Iraq and Syria. These deployments are intended to bolster our efforts in those 2 countries as the focus of coalition operations increasingly turns to isolating Mosul and Raqqa, as well as ensuring that our partners on the ground in Iraq and Syria have the enabling support needed to continue their momentum against ISIL. The deployment to Iraq comes at a sensitive time for Prime Minister Abadi, who continues to struggle to bring together the Sunni, Shia, and Kurdish elements of the political establishment in Iraq, a complicated reality that was in full display earlier this week when the Prime Minister partially reshuffled his cabinet amid stepped-up pressure by thousands of protesters threatening to storm the parliament. As we consider our policy in Iraq particularly, it's important to remember that the coalition is there at the invitation of the Iraqis, and we must remain cognizant of the political opposition of some to our continued and growing presence in the country. Ignoring that reality risks damaging our broader strategic goal of a lasting political solution for Iraq and the defeat of ISIL. In Syria, the cessation of hostilities has seen a growing number of violations in recent days. The most concern are the violations by the forces of the Assad regime in Aleppo and the surrounding region. In March, President Putin announced Russia was to begin withdrawing its forces from Syria, but as often the case with President Putin, the public message is not consistent with the reality of events on the ground. According to reports, forces loyal to the Syrian government are beginning to mass and concentrate compact power around Aleppo. These actions do not portend well for the direction of this conflict. I hope the Secretary and Chairman will provide their updated assessment on the military actions of the regime and Russian forces and how these figure into our planning. One matter currently before the committee is a request by the administration to extend the DoD's authority to train and equip the moderate Syrian opposition. As we consider this request, it is my assessment that without our local Syrian partners on the ground, the recapture of Kobane, Hasaka, and Shadidi, and a number of other towns and villages would not have been possible. And I hope the Secretary and Chairman will speak to the importance of this request for an extension. In addition to Iraq and Syria, I hope the Secretary and the Chairman will provide their updated assessment on the threat posed by ISIL's growing presence in Libya. There have been public reports of a number of U.S. military operations in Libya and some suggestions that more may follow. As the committee moves towards the mark of the Defense Authorization Bill, it is critical that we have a keen understanding of your view on the threat emanating from Libya. Gentlemen, I look forward to your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome, Secretary Carter.
Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reed, thank you. Thank you for those statements and for this hearing and for the range, both geographic and in terms of tactical, operational, and strategic that you're asking us to speak to. Thank all the members of the committee for being here and for your interest in this. And above all, Chairman, thank you for thanking the troops. It means a lot. You have many opportunities to carry that to them directly, but I'll try to do that too when I do. Appreciate that. I will briefly in my opening statement address all of the aspects of the subjects raised in your two statements. Obviously our campaign to defeat ISIL, but more broadly our military strategy in the Middle East. And I appreciate that this is my 7th appearance before this committee, the 5th one focused on the Middle East since I became Secretary of Defense. And the timing is, as Senator Reed noted, fortuitous in the sense I just returned from a 2-week trip to the Asia Pacific and also the Middle East, both regions critical to U.S. and global security, and where our men and women in uniform are deeply engaged as they are all over the world. It's emblematic of why, with all the challenges going on today, particularly the 5 challenges I discussed with you last month in my budget testimony, namely Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and terrorism, especially ISIL, DoD can't choose between one or the other, or between acting in the present and investing in the future. We have to do them all. While there's much I could say about the Asia Pacific, I'm obviously going to focus my comments here today on the Middle East. There, our actions and our strong military posture continue to be guided by our North Star of what's in America's national interests. These are several things. They include dealing ISIL a lasting defeat. That was the principal purpose of my visit to Iraq last week, where I conferred with our commanders and visited with our troops, met with Prime Minister Abadi and Defense Minister Obeidi, spoke to Kurdistan Regional Government President Barzani, and announced a number of key next steps that our President Obama has directed to further accelerate the defeat of ISIL. More on that in a moment. When I appeared before this committee to discuss our counter-ISIL campaign in early December, I outlined how we had embarked on a major acceleration of this campaign, an effort Chairman Dunford and I had recommended to the President in October, and it consisted of multiple steps. First, there were a number of immediate accelerants. We deployed additional strike aircraft to Incirlik, supporting an expanded air campaign against new targets and new categories of targets illuminated by refined intelligence. We deployed an initial contingent of Special Operations Forces to Syria. We expanded equipping of Syrian Arab forces engaged in the fight against ISIL. We began enabling capable, motivated local forces in southern Syria also, and enhancing Jordan's border control and defenses. We leveraged air power and advisors to help the Peshmerga take Sinjar, cutting the Iraqi side of the main line of communication between ISIL's power centers in Raqqa and Mosul. We introduced an expeditionary targeting force. We worked to improve our ability to target ISIL's leadership and presence beyond Iraq and Syria. And we started to expand the military campaign against ISIL to every domain, including cyber and space. All these capabilities were marshaled against a clear coalition military campaign plan, focusing on operations on 3 objectives. 1, destroying ISIL's parent tumor in Iraq and Syria, which is necessary. not sufficient, but necessary. Second, combating the metastases of the ISIL tumor worldwide, wherever they appear, as has been noted by both the chairman and Senator Reid. And three, our most important mission, which is to help protect the homeland. In addition to accelerating the campaign with additional U.S. capabilities, we renewed our outreach to coalition members. And over the last 3 months, I've convened my counterparts several times in Paris, Brussels, last week in Riyadh, next week in Europe, to brief them on the coalition military command plan, but above all, to urge them to contribute more and in more meaningful ways. Since we embarked on that major acceleration, results followed, and they've continued even in recent weeks. On the battlefield in Iraq, the Iraqi security forces retook Ramadi and Heat, and along with Kurdish Peshmerga have begun operations to isolate and pressure Mosul, with the intent to collapse ISIL's control over that city. And in Syria, capable and motivated local forces supported by our coalition retook the Tishreen Dam in the west and the town of Shadadi in the east, cutting off 2 significant lines of communication into Raqqa, including one of the last major northern arteries between Raqqa and Mosul, and therefore between ISIL in Syria and ISIL in Iraq. We've also seen results in targeting ISIL's leaders and finances. We've systematically eliminated ISIL's cabinet, having taken out its so-called ministers of war and finance. We captured one of the principles of ISIL's chemical warfare enterprise, removed external plotters from the battlefield, and most recently took out the ISIL emir for southern Mosul, weakening ISIL's ranks there. And our attacks on ISIL's economic infrastructure, from oil wells and trucks to cash storage to ISIL's financial leaders, is putting a stranglehold on ISIL's ability to pay its fighters, undermining its ability to govern, and making it harder to attract new recruits. These are the results in our coalition's. There are also results in our coalition's train and equip efforts as well. So far, with your support in Congress, we've trained over 20,000 Iraqi security forces and provided 6 full brigade sets of equipment to the Iraqi army. And we provided 2 brigade sets to the Peshmerga, part of more than 12 million pounds of critical supplies donated by more than 20 countries, for our part ranging from ammunition to small, medium, and heavy weapons to counter-ISIL equipment. Meanwhile, in addition to the local forces we're working with in both Iraq and Syria, 90% of our military coalition partners from Europe, the Gulf, and Asia, 26 countries in all, have committed in the past few months to increase their contributions to help accelerate the defeat of ISIL. All this has been necessary for putting ISIL on a path to a lasting defeat, but it's not sufficient. Indeed, I've consistently told you that we're looking to do more and that we would be doing more. As we take advantage of opportunities, we're generating new ones and then seizing those opportunities to repeat this cycle, reinforcing success. This has been our intent and is consistent with our overall strategic approach, which is to enable capable, motivated local forces to recapture and then hold and govern territory tyrannized by ISIL. Now, based on the results we've had and on our desire to continue accelerating ISIL's lasting defeat, we are conducting the next plays of the military campaign. They are: 1, stabilizing Iraq's Anbar province; 2, generating Iraqi security forces to envelop Mosul; 3, identifying and developing more local forces in Syria that will isolate and pressure Raqqa; and 4, providing more firepower, sustainment, and logistical support to our partners to enable them to collapse ISIL's control over both these cities. To help facilitate these next plays, we're taking a number of key actions in both Iraq and Syria, actions President Obama directed and that he and I announced over the last week and a half. And I should note that the President has approved all the actions that Chairman Dunford and I have recommended to him to date. In Iraq, our actions are in support of Iraqi security forces' operations to isolate and pressure Mosul. They've all been approved by Prime Minister Abadi. As I told our troops in Baghdad last week, we'll be placing advisors with the ISF down to the brigade and battalion level. We'll be leveraging Apache attack helicopters to support the ISF's effort to envelop and then retake Mosul. We'll send additional HIMARS to support the Iraqi ground offensive there. We'll provide financial assistance to the Peshmerga up to $415 million to bolster one of the most effective fighting forces against ISIL. And to do all this, we're going to adjust how we use the U.S. forces already in Iraq and immediately bring in about 215 more of them. In Syria, our actions are to help our local partners continue isolating and pressuring Raqqa. As the President announced on Monday, we're increasing U.S. forces there sixfold, from 50 to 300. These additional 250 personnel, including Special Operations Forces, will help expand our ongoing efforts to identify, train, and equip capable, motivated local anti-ISIL forces inside Syria, especially among the Sunni Arab community. They'll also serve as a hub to incorporate partners' special forces from both European and Gulf partners that will augment our coalition's counter-ISIL efforts there. In the meantime, in addition to initiating training inside Syria, we're also continuing to train and equip other vetted Syrian forces outside of Syria, keeping our focus, as we have in recent months, on battle-hardened, proven anti-ISIL leaders whom we can make more capable as enablers and amplifiers of our effects. And in this context, let me say that the Section 1209 program is central to our ground campaign in Syria, and we're now carrying out a different approach than before, and instead one that we've used to train and enable local elements that have proven themselves against ISIL on the battlefield. We've moved away from last year's disappointments with a former approach to the program, and we need your support to fully overcome them. Focus on the program as it is now, and in particular, release the now $349 million in 1209 funding currently blocked by Congress. And Mr. Chairman, I understand you intend to help clear these funds with the committee, and I hope other committees will follow suit, and I'm grateful for that. The fact is, for our commanders to be agile in accelerating our campaign against ISIL, we need a similarly agile congressional funding process. We're required to submit reprogramming requests, as you all know, to the 4 congressional defense committees, and so far on these funds, we've received differing responses on differing timelines, and sometimes with conflicting demands. We must get this working better going forward. I would also urge you and the other 3 defense committees to consider ending the reprogramming requirement for Syria, so that it's on equal footing with how you've structured your oversight of our train and equip programs in Iraq and Afghanistan. As it stands, the current setup invites troubling micromanagement of a wartime effort and risks inhibiting results. Beyond Iraq and Syria, we're also addressing ISIL's metastases. In Afghanistan, since we authorized our forces to conduct targeted strikes against ISIL there, we've been able to degrade the terrorist group's elements in that country. And in Libya, we have continued to follow ISIL activities closely, undertaking a successful strike last year in which we took out ISIL's key leader in the country, another strike in February against an ISIL training camp. And as the new Libyan government gets on its feet, we will support it in the fight against ISIL. We will counter ISIL and work with partners wherever ISIL has or tries to gain a foothold, whether in Yemen, West Africa, or South or Southeast Asia. Even as we do more, we're continuing to marshal our friends and allies across the counter-ISIL coalition to do more also to accelerate ISIL's lasting defeat. When I met with my counterparts from the Gulf Cooperation Council last week, I emphasized the importance of their countries doing more, not only militarily, as Saudi Arabia and the UAE have been doing, but also politically and economically. That's because Sunni support for stabilization, multi-sectarian governance, and reconstruction will all be critical to ensuring that ISIL stays defeated. And Mr. Chairman, I just want to second the point you made, which is in the region, in my conversations parties are already beginning to look beyond the defeat of ISIL and ask what their situation is at that point. That reinforces the need, as you indicated, to think strategically. Next week in Stuttgart, Germany, I'll be convening my fellow defense ministers from the major contributors to the military campaign to discuss ways we can all continue to accelerate our efforts. That said, while the military momentum is gathering strength and ISIL is struggling to resist our multifaceted pressure, I am increasingly concerned about political, economic, and diplomatic challenges in both Iraq and Syria affecting the pace of the military campaign. In Iraq, as the proximity of the ISIL threat against Baghdad has diminished, political ambitions have created discord. And in some instances, ethno-sectarian competition has increased, creating an added burden and distraction for Prime Minister Abadi's government before the task of defeating ISIL is complete. This, of course, is occurring while Iraq struggles with significant fiscal challenges due to the lower price of oil and a huge reconstruction bill as it retakes cities from ISIL. And in Syria, competing agendas for the future of the political transition are inhibiting the generation and coalescing of anti-ISIL forces. Secretary Kerry, Secretary Liu, and my colleagues from the other departments and agencies are focused on this intently, but they need support from you and Congress to help ensure that military momentum is matched with political and economic momentum, and that the military defeat of ISIL in Syria and Iraq, when it is complete, will be lasting. I've articulated a clear strategy with the end state being a lasting defeat of ISIL, and that means it must be achieved by local forces. Our strategic approach is therefore to enable such forces to collapse ISIL's control of Mosul and Raqqa by bringing to bear in support of them the full might of the U.S. military through some of our most unique capabilities, such as precision air campaign and expeditionary targeting forces, offensive operations in cyberspace, training, logistics, sustainment, and equipment. Enabling local forces, not substituting for them, is necessary to ensure a lasting defeat. And sometimes that means our pace is predicated on the speed at which local forces can absorb our enabling. Now, some seem to suggest we pursue different strategies, and there are, in fact, alternative strategies. And I've addressed these alternatives in previous testimonies. But we don't recommend them, and here's why. One alternative would be to leave the complex and chaotic Middle East, try to contain ISIL's danger to the United States, and target terrorists entirely from offshore. An approach of this sort has its attractions, since it avoids the many complexities of the Middle East. But the reality is that such a containment approach simply cannot succeed in today's connected and globalized world, and I don't recommend it. Another alternative would be to introduce a significant foreign ground force, hypothetically international, although almost certainly preponderantly American, to capture Raqqa and Mosul and other territories seized by ISIL. But as I've testified previously, there are several problems with this approach that have led me not to recommend it either. In the near term, such a strategic approach would entail a significant military undertaking that, much as we'd wish otherwise, realistically we would embark upon largely by ourselves. And it would be ceding our competitive advantage of special forces, mobility, and firepower, instead fighting on the enemy's terms of ground combat amidst a local population that has previously responded violently to such an approach. In the medium term, by seeming to Americanize or Westernize the effort to expel ISIL from the populations of Iraq and Syria, we might turn those local people who are fighting ISIL, who are inclined to resist their rule, into fighting us instead. As Chairman Dunford has said, ISIL, quote, would love nothing more than a large presence of U.S. forces on the ground in Iraq and Syria so that they could have a call to jihad, end quote. And lastly, in the long term, there would still remain the problem of securing and governing the territory recaptured, which in the end must be done by local forces. We cannot substitute for them. The bottom line is this: we can't ignore this fight, but we also can't win it entirely from the outside in. That's why we're helping capable, motivated local forces in every way we can without taking their place. And finally, I want to conclude with a few words about resources, as I have serious concerns with a proposal from one of the defense committees to underfund DoD's overseas warfighting accounts by $18 billion and spend that money on programmatic items we didn't request. I have to say this approach is deeply flawed and troubling. Having detailed my objections yesterday before the Appropriations Committee, today in this context of this testimony, I just want to highlight the danger of underfunding our war effort. gambling with funding for our troops in places like Iraq and Syria. As Secretary of Defense, I cannot support such a maneuver. Indeed, it's exceedingly important that we provide our troops and commanders in the field with all the resources they need to succeed. And I know that with your support and with the continued dedication of our people and our partners, we will deliver ISIL a lasting defeat. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Dunford.
Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reed,
Mr.
distinguished
Secretary,
member.
I mean.
Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reed, distinguished members of the committee, thanks for the opportunity to join Secretary Carter in appearing before you today to talk about the Counter-ISIL campaign. Secretary Carter just provided a campaign update and an overview of our strategic approach. Before taking your questions, I'd like to briefly share my perspective on where we are in the military campaign and where we're going. Mindful that ISIL is a trans-regional threat with affiliates located from South Asia to West Africa, our top priority remains to disrupt attacks against the homeland, the American people, our allies, and our partners, regardless of the source. We continue to assess that the most dangerous threat remains core ISIL in Iraq and Syria. I just returned from Iraq last week and received a campaign update from our commanders and Iraqi leadership. I also had the opportunity to visit with our troops and to observe Iraqi forces at their training sites. While the situation is complex with no shortage of political and military challenges, I was encouraged by what I heard and what I saw on the ground. Last fall, it would have been fair to say that ISIL had the momentum. I don't believe that is any longer the case. Without repeating the detailed progress outlined by Secretary Carter, I'll summarize by saying that with our strikes, and in conjunction with Iraqi security forces, the Peshmerga, and Sunni tribal forces, we've reduced ISIL's territorial control, undermined its brand and aura of invincibility, and destroyed much of its warfighting capability. The enemy's resources and freedom of movement have also been significantly reduced, and the pressure we are applying is degrading the enemy's morale. More importantly, the progress of the last several months has instilled confidence in our Iraqi partners. They believe they can defeat ISIL. Currently, Iraqi forces are continuing operations in the Anbar province while simultaneously conducting shaping operations to isolate Mosul. In the months ahead, Iraqi forces, the Peshmerga, and Sunni tribal forces will bring increasing pressure to bear against the enemy in Mosul. Meanwhile, we'll be aggressive in looking for opportunities to reinforce success, as Secretary Carter has said, and will seize every opportunity to maintain the momentum and increase the effectiveness of our partners. Similarly, in Syria, the pressure we put on ISIL has degraded their capabilities, limited their freedom of movement, and reduced their resources. In the past few months, the local Kurdish and Arab forces that we support have retaken a significant percentage of the territory previously under ISIL control in northeast Syria. Other vetted Syrian opposition forces are currently fighting along the Turkish-Syrian border in operations that will put additional pressure on ISIL, further stemming the flow of foreign fighters and supplies into Syria. The recent authorization of additional U.S. forces in Syria will allow us to increase the capacity and capability of indigenous ground forces and set the conditions for operations against Raqqa. In closing, I believe we've moved the campaign forward over the last few months. The progress is real. That said, we're not satisfied or complacent about where we are, and we won't be satisfied until ISIL is defeated in Iraq and Syria and wherever it attempts to take root. Once again, thanks for the opportunity to appear before you this morning, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, General. You know, Secretary Carter, it's frustrating to a lot of us to, as you outlined the options that we have. The option that you left out, which is entirely doable, and I know this for a fact, is if we had about 10,000 of a 100,000 person contingent, of which the Sunni nations would contribute, that would go in on the ground and take Raqqa and Mosul. And when you talk about the territorial gains, you forget to mention that the second largest city in Iraq is still in ISIS hands, and they have still no strategy so far to retake Raqqa. But it's really frustrating to us when you set up these straw men that the only alternatives we have is to walk away, and the other is a preponderantly American force. That's not true. The other option is that we have been pushing for months and months, years, is an international force of which the United States would be a small component of, and that is doable. And when I keep hearing this, that, oh, we only have these two choices, I say with all due respect, it's intellectually dishonest. Now, on the issue of the reprogramming, yes, I was, quote, blocking the approval of the reprogramming until yesterday when I had a very excellent briefing from General Dunford that cleared up concerns that I had. And why did I have those concerns, Mr. Secretary? Is because when we spent a couple of $100 million the last time, then the commander of Central Command testified before this committee that we had 4 or 5 people left after expending a couple of $100 million in what I predicted would be an abysmal failure, which was making these people pledge that they would only attack ISIL. Now, my question is that still the case with this force? Are they prohibited from responding to being attacked by Syria?
Thank you, Chairman. I'll address both of your questions and ask the Chairman to do the same. You're right. I described 2 bookends, if you like, and there are various gradations in between. So you're absolutely right. With respect to the option you describe of a 9-to-1 ratio of international forces to U.S. forces, that would be a highly desirable circumstance to be in. I do not doubt that. I have no indication from those countries, despite a lot of effort, of a willingness to do that. And then the second point I'd just like to make, and then I'll leave that point, is as I was describing the possibility of foreign forces entering Iraq and Syria, I tried to describe there the welcome that they might receive and the remaining issue of sustaining territory once it is taken and held. And I think that's the principal strategic issue with a large foreign force, whether American or hypothetically.
Please accelerate your answer.
I will. And then second, on the 1209 program, thank you for that, Chairman. And I just want to acknowledge, and I acknowledged this last year, we made a disappointing start at that, and no bones about that. We have changed the approach to that fundamentally. I believe, in fact, the Chairman has described that to you, and that's the basis on which you've indicated a willingness to support it. Just to be brief about what the difference is, we were trying, when that program was initiated, to make forces, brand new forces, to counter ISIL in Syria. Our approach now is to identify, and this is where the special forces have been valuable to us, forces already fighting ISIL, whom we can enable with the great might of the American military. That's our new approach. Chairman.
I got to ask more questions. Do you believe that the ceasefire is collapsing, General Dunford?
Chairman, I do believe there's some difficulty with the ceasefire.
And we know what happened last time before the ceasefire, and that was that the Russian air was bombing the daylights out of the moderate forces, many of which we had trained and equipped. What are we going to do with the collapse of the ceasefire, a resumption of Russian bombing of American-trained forces? What is going to be our option there?
Chairman, if our forces are attacked by regime forces, we have the authority to respond.
Will we give them the ability to respond?
We will, Chairman.
That means surface air capability?
It does not mean that, Chairman.
Well, I guess I have to go back to the problem that we face, and that is that with the ceasefire breaking down, with millions of refugees, with 200, or at least 300,000 people killed, and the resumption of hostilities, now with Russian air practicing indiscriminate bombing, what are we going to do about that situation? And can we count on a couple of thousand American trained and equipped forces to reduce or counter what is clearly a consolidation of power on the part in the hands of Bashar Assad? I hate ISIS, But it isn't ISIS that's killed 300,000. It isn't ISIS that's driven millions into refugee status. It's Bashar Assad. And I wonder what you believe our options are in this obviously deteriorating situation in Syria, which means a resumption of the slaughter and resumption of the flow of refugees. Mr. Secretary.
May I start, and then Chairman, you chime in behind. We are intent upon fighting ISIL in Syria because our principal and paramount responsibility is to protect the American people, and ISIL's trying to attack the American people. But I agree with you also about the Assad regime, and it's a reason why Assad can't be part of the future of that country, in my judgment, because of what he's done to his people. And I also agree with you that while the cessation of hostilities has had an important effect, particularly in both the North and the South, but very much in the South, in permitting humanitarian assistance, it is not being completely abided by, that is especially by the Syrian regime. And finally, you mentioned Russia, and while you're mentioning Russia, I'll just remind you of what I've said to you before. The Russians said they were coming into Syria to fight ISIL, and that's not what they did. They supported Assad, and thereby prolonging the Syrian civil war. So that is a tragic situation, and Secretary Kerry is trying to work on that. And as you know, I can't describe here the full extent of our efforts with respect to the Assad regime. But again, I just go back to our focus in this testimony, and our focus pretty much in the Department of Defense, not exclusively, but largely is on protecting America, and that means destroying ISIL.
My time has expired, but obviously, according to General Nicholson, the situation in Afghanistan is deteriorating. Isn't it imperative that we revisit the decision on reducing the number of troops in Afghanistan by half now? And shouldn't we do that before these important meetings in June and July?
Chairman, we're constantly reevaluating the situation in Afghanistan. I think
we have to make a decision.
We do, and we're constantly making.
Will the President be making that decision?
I think the President will be making those decisions. He's indicated a continued willingness to adjust to circumstances there and to ensure the success of something we've been working on for a long time.
But you agree it's important our allies know that
Yes, it
decision
is.
before these
I do.
Thank you very much. I apologize to the committee for staying my time. Senator Reid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Again, gentlemen, thank you for your testimony. And in this very complex region, sometimes we have difficulties with our allies as well as our adversaries. And Turkey has been both a supporter in allowing us to operate out of Incirlik, and also someone who has not been completely cooperative in some of our requests. Mr. Secretary, you will be seeing them, I presume, in Stuttgart. And can you comment on what you would like them to do more and whether they are capable or willing to do that?
Thanks. And it's a timely question and a very important one, because by dint of geography, they are the single most important of the NATO Western family of countries that can have an influence on the situation in Syria. They are doing more, and I'm grateful for what they are doing. They're doing more along the border. They're helping us to operate in some ways I can go into in another setting, and I'm very grateful for that. And I'd like them to do more. I've wanted them to do more for some time. I think I've made that clear. But we continue to work with them. They're an important party. They're an important ally. They can make a larger contribution.
Those are in the spectrum of possible operational approaches that you laid out. The one that's being adopted now is a rather light footprint, special operations troops, air, going in, trying to degrade both ISIL around Raqqa, ISIL around Mosul. A more significant ground presence would require, I presume, a adjacent country providing both the operational and political support for a staging area. have you any indications of that being accepted, tolerated, or agreed to?
Well, Turkey's allow us to operate out of Incirlik. It would be an enormous part of the air campaign. Very, very grateful for that. So they are willing to allow us to operate against ISIL. And with respect to the special forces in Syria, I just want to distinguish that from the Iraq. If in the Iraq case, we have there aren't special forces. We have thousands of Americans that are doing all kinds of things that are necessary. They're logistics, because remember, this Iraqi army needs to be rebuilt. It needs to be sustained. It needs to have its line of communications sustained as it goes up the Tigris River Valley towards Mosul. There's a lot of pieces to this. The reason for these, again, without going into a lot of detail, for the special forces presence in Syria is not their numbers themselves. It's their ability to go in, identify groups that are willing to go after ISIL, and then bring down, in like a funnel of a tornado, the great weight of the American military power through those forces and amplify, enable their effects. That's what they're so good at. That's why they're there. That's why we're increasing their numbers.
No, I concur, but the point would be that those types of operations, special operations, have been supported by adjacent countries. Is there indication they would support a large land force mobilizing on their territory and going across their territory?
I don't have any indication from the Turks that they would do that. No, not the chairman was.
Let me shift gears. Many on the committee have been urging that we take a much more proactive cyber presence in the conflict, and that seems to be emerging. And I wonder, both you, Mr. Secretary, and you, General Dunford, could comment upon that cyber operations.
I comment very generally on it. I asked with the chairman a number of months ago, Admiral Rogers, our Cybercom commander, and also the NSA director, to take on the war against ISIL as essentially the first major combat operation of Cybercom. He has done that. The objectives there are to interrupt ISIL command and control, interrupt its ability to move money around, interrupt its ability to tyrannize and control population, interrupt its ability to recruit externally. All of that it does in a cyber-enabled way. And so we're talking about cyber operations in Syria and Iraq, and my feeling about that was and is very direct, which is, we're bombing them, and we're going to take out their internet and so forth as well. In the modern world, that's necessary to defeat an enemy, and we got to use every tool that we have. This is the first big test of Cybercom. I have very high expectations they can be successful. Let me ask if the chairman
Brief comment,
to add anything.
please.
Senator, I think just to add to what the Secretary said, I mean, the overall effect we're trying to achieve is virtual isolation, and this complements very much our physical actions on the ground, and a particular focus is external operations that might be conducted by ISIL.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Inhofe.
Mr. Secretary, this week we've been talking about the 250 troops that would be deployed, additional troops in Syria, and then 217 in Iraq. How many boots do we have on the ground now in Syria and Iraq?
In Iraq, the total is around 3,500 now. I just want to remind you that that's the force management level.
Yes,
It's
I understand.
not like it the way we do it everywhere else. And the special operations complement that we're multiplying sixfold is from 50 to those 300 in Syria.
Okay, General Dunford, talk a little bit about rules of engagement, because a lot of times they talk about train and equip. We know that train and equip would only include defensive activity in certain areas. Where are they now on that?
Senator, are you talking about our forces?
Our forces, yes.
Our forces on the ground. Number one, they're going after ISIL, so they're unrestricted in going after ISIL. That includes our air campaign. And then if they're under attack and there's positive identification of enemy and a hostile intent, they're authorized to engage.
Oh, they are. Okay, that's good. Now, the question that I have is, the second question is all of the activity. We have, during the course of this hearing, not really talked about anything outside of Syria and Iraq, when other things are happening right now. The They're talking about in Reuters yesterday, the Islamic State has greatly expanded its control over territories in Libya, militants claiming key positions, and all of this. Our Director Clapper recently warned that ISIL is spreading in Europe, that opens the borders across Europe, have allowed ISIL to plant sleeper cells and so forth. General Rodriguez, who is the commander of AFRICOM, has said that the ISIL force in Africa has grown to 6,000 in the past year with a major presence in eastern cities. And we talk about eastern cities, we talk about Libya, we talk about Tunisia, we talk about Algeria. But now it's gone down further. It's in sub-Saharan Africa. We're talking about Somalia. We're talking about Nigeria. And I have friends who say that even in the Central African Republic and the Eastern Congo, it's becoming apparent. Now, my question is this. When we developed AFRICOM to start with, it was developed without resources. They have to get their resources from EUCOM and other sources. And that being the case, it's what is happening right now. I think if we say that we had a strategy to contain ISIL, that the strategy didn't work, that we are not containing ISIL. So we talk about our troops, what they're doing up there, the train and equip programs in Syria and in Iraq. But what about these new areas that they're going into now, and how we're going to be able to resource them should we have to? What are your thoughts about that?
I'll give a start, and then the chairman's been working on this very much also. You're absolutely right. We have seen, and Director Clapper, I'm not familiar with the specific testimony, but I'm sure it's absolutely right. And you know Africa, of course, extremely well yourself, Senator. There's a mixture of two things going on. One is a rebranding of existing extremist groups signing up, so to speak, to ISIL, and the other is newly inspired or newly funded nucleuses of groups. Both of those are of concern, and I wouldn't say containment, I would say destruction of ISIL wherever it emerges is the right strategy. And it can't end with Syria and Iraq. That's necessary. It's not sufficient. We need to do it elsewhere, and we are both following those developments really closely and taking some action, some of which we can discuss here, and I'll turn it over to the chairman at that point.
Yeah, Senator, before your answer, is Rodriguez right when he talks about the number of the 6,000 number down there?
I agree with that assessment, Senator. Right. I agree with that assessment. Right now, with regard specifically to AFRICOM, AFRICOM's conducting operations in West Africa, in East Africa, and in Libya. General Rodriguez recently developed a concept of operations for support of Libyan forces and the Libyan government. We have, as a result of his concept of operations, reallocated resources. The Secretary made that decision about a month and a half ago, to reallocate resources to AFRICOM to further develop the intelligence that we would need to support operations in Libya and throughout Africa. We're also working closely with the French in West Africa and with a coalition in East Africa.
Yeah, and in sub-Saharan Africa, down there, all the activity now in Nigeria, the same thing?
We also have ISR in that area and are working with partners on the ground in that area.
Good. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary Carter, before I get to a couple of different questions regarding ISIL, I just want to bring to your attention an important issue facing our national security at the moment in terms of the availability of domestic trusted supply of state-of-the-art microelectronics for our military's weapon systems and platforms. You may be aware there was a recent sale of IBM's Trusted Foundry, which had been DoD's sole source supplier of leading-edge technologies for over a decade now to a company based in Abu Dhabi. I think that raises some serious concerns about the future stability of DoD's trusted microelectronics source. I think between Defense Microelectronics Activity, MESA at Sandia National Labs, and certainly the capable state-of-the-art industry suppliers here in the U.S., we ought to be able to fill that void. But I just want to urge you to take a hard look at that and make sure we have a long-term strategy.
Senator, thank you. We have, and we do have a mitigation strategy. I'd be happy to have someone come over and discuss it with you, but it's an important point, and we need a trusted source of microcircuits, especially for very special and essential functions.
Exactly. Well, I look forward to that. To the issue of the day, for both you, Secretary, and General Dunford, we all recognize that ISIL continues to be a very serious threat, but there have been some positive signs of progress since last year. And according to media reports, new foreign fighters joining ISIL, those numbers are at a significantly lower rate this time than they were last year. The news reports have suggested that they're on the order of something like 200 a month from something close to 2,000 a month a year ago. I want to ask you, are those numbers that we see in the media actually accurate? To what do you attribute this sharp decline? And whether or not Cybercom, which you mentioned, is having a role within that overall as well.
We do observe that trend. I think it's very hard to be precise about these numbers, but I think that trend is one the intelligence community does say is a very discernible. At the same time, from my point of view, any is too many. So we're not done until there are none. But I'm told that trend is observable in the numbers as well as we're able to discern those numbers.
General.
Senator, I would attribute the reduction, and I'm with the Secretary in terms of specific numbers, but I think the reduction is for a couple of reasons. One is we assess that foreign fighters come from about 145 countries, and a number of those countries now have come together in a more meaningful way to share information and intelligence. And it's not what we would want it to be, but it's much better than it was a year ago. And we do have a specific organization that's been established to bring those nations together to exchange information and to be proactive about foreign fighters. And so our visibility on foreign fighters has increased. Secondly, the Turks have been helpful in that regard, and I think the efforts that they have taken along the border have, in fact, reduced the numbers of foreign fighters that flow back and forth between Turkey and Syria. But again, in both areas, both with regard to what the Turks are doing and with regard to the information and intelligence exchanges that we have much more work to do, and we're not satisfied with the level, but it has proven to make an impact.
Well, we appreciate that you don't intend to let up until the job is done. Have we had any success in sort of cutting off the ability of ISIS to reach right into even suburban communities in the United States and create a demand for, I think a number of us have had news reports where kids in our own communities, teenagers, people in their 20s, suddenly decided to buy a ticket and try and get to Syria. How is that process going? Are we able to cut off that sort of electronic foreign fighter source? And are we having an impact in that area as well?
Our effort in Iraq and Syria is aimed at making it more difficult for them to operate out of those locations, including by trying to lure Americans into acts of violence. I do have to say that the law enforcement community and Homeland Security have an enormous effort here at home. I don't want to speak for them, but they're working extremely hard on that, and that's not in our area of responsibility, but it's essential. So they're working, so to speak, the other end of the problem.
Thank you both for General. Did you want to add anything?
Senator, I was just going to say that one thing that's encouraging, there was a recent poll that talked about the appeal of ISIL to Islamic youth worldwide, and there's been a fair reduction in that, and I would attribute that in part to our success against ISIL. And again, that narrative of invincibility has been shattered over the past year. The less success they have on the battlefield, the less of an appeal there is, the less of the appeal they have to be a global caliphate.
Great. Thank you both very much.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. General Dunford, as Chairman McCain just pointed out, most of the fatalities and civilian casualties in Syria are caused by Bashar Assad's barrel bombs and air attacks. Do you agree that we have the capability to take out Assad's air force?
I do, Senator.
And why have we not done so?
We have not declared war on the Syrian regime, Senator.
Well, you're not saying it would take a congressional declaration of war to take that action?
I think it would take the president directing us to do that, Senator.
Okay, so I wonder why the president has not directed us to prevent these civilian fatalities and casualties by taking out Assad's Air Force.
The task he's given us militarily is against ISIL, Senator.
What would be your recommendation in that regard?
Specifically as to whether attack the regime.
As to whether
or
we
not.
should take out the Air Force that is causing the majority of the civilian fatalities and casualties.
Yeah, Senator, I'd prefer not to give that recommendation in public. That's a policy recommendation that if I was going to provide that, I'd provide it to the president in private.
Okay. Secretary Carter, you said Assad cannot be part of the future. Is that the explicit view of the President of the United States?
Yes, it is, and that's why Secretary Kerry is working on a political transition to a regime after Assad. As the chairman just indicated, we haven't undertaken to change that regime by force now for a number of years. We have not made that undertaking. Our focus in Syria as the Department of Defense is on fighting ISIL because of its direct threat to Americans. But with respect to the tragedy of the civil war in Syria, we're working on that political transition, but it's a political transition. Our leadership, and I think has indicated, it necessarily involves Assad removing himself from the scene because of exactly everything he's done to his people, which you've just cited.
Assad voluntarily removing himself from the scene.
No, I think here's where the Russians would do well to make what they do correspond to what they say. And that is to move the political transition forward, use the leverage that they have and that they've gained by intervening on Assad's side to end the civil war and get Assad to step aside while keeping some structure to the Syrian government that can then marry up to moderate opposition whom we support and create a life and a government for the people of that shattered country.
Well, we certainly have seen that out of the Russian leadership. Let me just ask, there were reports last December. There was an article in Bloomberg saying Obama no longer seems sure Assad should go. I think what you're saying is that that's not accurate. And so let me just make sure, is the president ruling out somehow working with the Assad regime against ISIS in the short term?
We have not worked with them. They've shown no inclination to work with us. We're not planning to do that.
Is there a debate within the administration about that?
I've not heard that idea broached.
Mr. Secretary, a number of European parliamentarians I've spoken with in recent months have told me in private that they wish Europe had worked with us on Syria back in 2013, and frankly, I wish Congress had been more resolute in that regard also back in 2013. Senator Cotton was a voice in the wilderness at that time. But now that our NATO allies in Europe face the chaos of an unprecedented migrant influx, do you believe NATO could help in substantive action against ISIL, and how could they be helpful?
I do believe they could be, I need to say, more helpful because the NATO countries, I think without exception, we mentioned Turkey already, its important contributions, are working along with us on the same campaign plan. NATO, as NATO, has not been asked yet by the European countries. We favor that. And there are reasons why NATO as NATO is more than the sum of the parts, and I'm sure you appreciate that. So I think NATO as NATO could make a contribution. That's being discussed with the Secretary General right now. I'll just say with respect to the refugee crisis, the Europeans preference has been to use the European Union and not NATO as their chosen instrument for addressing the refugee crisis. That is their choice. And so they have not asked in the main for NATO to be a big part of that effort. We did take a step to assist when I was in Brussels a few months ago to bring the Turks, the Greeks, and the Germans together to work some naval operations in the Aegean Sea aimed at deterring smugglers from using the Aegean to bring people from Turkey to Greece. That's had some success. But the Europeans in the main, this is their choice, have wanted the European Union, not NATO, to address the refugee situation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Carter, thank you for being here, and thank you for all your hard work. Last week, an advocacy group called Protect Our Defenders released a disturbing report detailing inaccurate and misleading information that was provided by the Department to this committee during a hearing in 2013 and in follow-up letters about sexual assault cases civilian prosecutors allegedly refused to prosecute, and that the chain of command later insisted they be tried as opposed to simply approved on the recommendation of military attorneys. The report by Protect Our Defenders and a follow-on in-depth investigation by the AP allege that the 93 cases the Department highlighted to prove the toughness of commanders in handling sexual assault cases were inaccurately described. I'm obviously very troubled by these allegations that the Department and specifically the military provided misleading information to Congress with the intent of defeating legislation that I and others on this committee introduced to address the scourge of sexual assault in the military. These reports suggest an effort by the military to undermine this committee and Congress's responsibilities to do oversight and determine policies. And if you've looked at this, the testimony that was given by Admiral Winfield was quoted verbatim by several senators. So when you give testimony, senators listen to what is said and they will repeat it. So if you are giving false information, then senators are left to be repeating false information, which is not in the interest of justice or legislating. They also throw into question the veracity of other testimony given by the military and defense officials in front of the committee. So have you looked into these allegations yet? And if not, do you plan to?
Thank you, Senator. Two things about that. The first is it's absolutely essential and that we give accurate information, because it's important that we use accurate information to defeat this scourge. And I appreciate all that you've done and all your leadership in that regard. Admiral Winfield is an extremely honorable man, and I can't imagine that he would ever give information that was not accurate and complete to the best of his knowledge. I have, in answer to your question, asked my staff to confirm the numbers that he gave, and we will, of course, report that to you. And if I can just say on a somewhat different note, but since you raised it, it is Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Month, and later this afternoon I will be recognizing 6 tremendous sexual assault response coordinators from around the country at our bases here. I just wanted to put in a word for them, because they're super. You had something to do with creating that role, and I appreciate it. But I have asked my staff to confirm those numbers, and it's very important that we do so.
So it's more than just numbers, to be aware. It's about the characterization of what happened.
Yes, exactly.
And what the AP did so effectively is when the military said these cases were declined by local DAs and weren't going to be prosecuted, and because commanders insisted that they be done, that they were done. What the AP uncovered by talking to these local DAs, one at Fort Drum, in fact, that was not the case. She did not decline to prosecute and said she wouldn't have, but that it was done collaboratively so that they felt the best way was for the military to proceed. So it's not about numbers. It's about how what happened was characterized. And I also share your faith in Admiral Winfield. But I would like to know, are you going to investigate who gave him those numbers, how those numbers were compiled, how they were characterized, how they were given him in report form, and who wrote those reports and provided that?
Yes, we will confirm or not confirm those facts. And you're right, it's not just the number, it's the characterization of each case. And I have asked my my staff to look into those numbers. It's important that we get it right. You're absolutely correct.
And what do you think is the line that the Department and military should draw when it comes to lobbying for or against legislation?
Our job is not to lobby. I think we're here to try to tell you the truth about what we're doing to the best of our ability and to explain the choices that are before the country, the resources that will be needed for things, and our efforts. Lobby is not a word I'd like to use with respect to our responsibilities. I think our responsibilities are to report to our overseers the truth as best we understand it.
And when can I expect your investigation of this issue to be complete?
Just as soon as it's complete, I promise you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
On behalf of Chairman McCain, Senator Fisher, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, what is the political end state that our military efforts in Syria are trying to achieve?
Our military efforts in Syria are intended to defeat ISIL and regain for local forces the territory now being tyrannized by ISIL and being used by it as a platform to attack America. We also have a
our military efforts, though, are focused entirely on ISIL, not the chaos that has happened.
That's
in
correct.
The entire
We have
country.
another effort, which Secretary Kerry can speak to, aimed at the political transition, as we were discussing earlier.
Do you believe that the efforts on the ground are favorable to this solution that we're going to have?
They have had results so far in the taking of, as I mentioned earlier, Tishreen Dam, Shadadi. There are some other operations afoot I can't speak of here. And then ultimately the purpose, and this is the reason why we're, and the President has given us authority to increase our numbers there. Our objective, of course, is to collapse ISIL's control over Raqqa.
I assume you're referring to the deployment of another 250
Correct.
soldiers to help contribute to that goal?
That's
Is that
correct.
And if we have as an immediate objective to recapture Raqqa, am I correct in stating that?
Yes.
Do you believe that the deployment of these 250 soldiers will specifically connect us to that goal then?
Let me talk to their purpose and then ask the chairman to pitch in as well, Senator. But that is precisely the reason why we are introducing those forces, and to identify and then enable forces that are local to the region and who want to expel ISIL from that territory, including Raqqa, and along the lines of what we've seen in Shadadi with the Syrian Arab Coalition, which, enabled by us, expelled ISIL from that important town. We'd like to do that with Raqqa as well. Chairman, do you want to add anything to that?
If I can just clarify a point, when you're talking about local forces, are you talking about Sunni forces in the area?
Yes, Arab forces in the main. They're the ones who live there and in that area.
And either you, Mr. Secretary, or General, how many Sunni forces do you believe are going to be required for this operation to be successful and for us to reach this goal?
Senator, if I just want to wrap back on the purpose of the Special Operations Forces, the increased U.S. forces on the ground in Syria, it's to do two things. To your original question, it's to grow the size of our partners on the ground and to increase their effectiveness. We assess right now that there are about 6,000 Syrian Arab Coalition members. We perhaps have as many as twice that number that are currently in a vetting process as a result of our forces on the ground, and we expect those numbers to increase. With regard to forces that are going to attack Raqqa, we think that'll be a combination of both Syrian Arab coalition members, but supported also by the Kurdish forces that we have been supporting here over the past year. Those numbers are almost 30,000 Kurdish forces there. So a combination of those forces plus the support that we provide from the coalition will be required for Raqqa.
And going past just the numbers of the boots on the ground that are needed, are there obviously other capabilities that are going to be required for these forces to have? For example, what kind of equipment do they need? And are there any leadership or chain of command issues that you believe need to be resolved before this will be effective?
Senator, the answer is yes. There are issues, and we're doing several things. One is we're assisting them in the planning effort. We're providing logistical support, which includes ammunition, and in some select groups with the authorities we have in the NDA, that's specific equipment, weapons, vehicles, communications equipment, and so forth, as well as training. And those are the four main areas that will be required for them to be successful.
Are there leadership concerns, chain of command concerns within these forces, especially when we have our troops embedded with them?
We have, that's been the purpose of the last few months, and that's why we felt confident increasing the numbers of U.S. forces there, because we believe the force protection concerns have been mitigated. We think the relationship that we have with these forces is sufficient for us to put additional forces there.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. On behalf of the Chairman McCain, let me recognize Senator Donnelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to yield my time to Mr. Manchin, who has a pressing engagement.
Thank you, Senator Donnelly. I appreciate that very much. And thank all of you for your service. And I'd like to direct this, first of all, to General Dunford. General Dunford, as both of you are aware, the Defense Department is forced to make hard choices in today's budget constraints. We understand that, too. Recently, it was announced that we are sending 250 of our special operators into Syria, and it costs approximately, I understand, $1 to $1.5 million to train one special operator. Equaling to roughly $375 million to train those 250. On Tuesday, this committee held a hearing to discuss the F-35 program, which is still estimating the cost about $108 million per unit. On Tuesday, I asked General Bogdan if he thinks we're spending our money wisely with the F-135s, and I understand we're on track to purchase 2,443 aircraft. Knowing the type of fight that we're expecting you to fight right now and to defend our country, conceptually, if we traded 10, just 10, F-35s, we could increase the size of our special operation forces by over 700. In the world that you see today, and are we concerned that we're sacrificing short-term needs for our long-term security strategy? And would 10 less F-35s make that much of a difference down the road as it would make a difference today with the 700 troops on the ground?
Senator, I think you bring up really the important issue we struggled with as we put the FY17 budget together, and that is that we do confront a wide range of challenges from Russia, Iran, North Korea, China, as well as violent extremism. And in fact, the kind of choices that you just outlined are exactly the choices we made. We did, in fact, reduce the numbers of F-35s this year to balance in other capability areas to make sure that with the money that we had, the top line that we had, that we did the very best we could to make sure we were postured to deal with all of those challenges. So we've done exactly as you've outlined, sir.
But I'm saying, I would ask then, I talked to General Milne when he was here and asked him basically on our troop strengths, Mr. Secretary. I think we're scheduled to go to 980, correct? 980,000?
Yes, in the Army active and reserve component
right. I asked
total.
him point blank, what does it take to defend the threats that we have? He didn't hesitate. He said 1-2. That's 220,000 troops short. I don't want to go back home to West Virginia and tell the people we were a little bit short on this one. So we're looking at ways, knowing that we're working under constraints. That's what we're asking for, some direction here that gives you the job to do, the wherewithal to do the best job that you have to do.
You concur with
the figure of 220,000 short?
No, our number is 980,000. That's the end strength number that we and the Army are aiming for. That's 450,000 active component.
I know what you're aiming at, sir, I'm sorry. But I'm asking, what does it take to do the job? The general believes it's 1.2.
That is the number that we're shooting at, namely 980,000 is the number that we think is adequate. No, I think General Milley's and the Army's, Acting Secretary of the Army's priorities are, in fact, readiness. That is the principal thing that General Milley and I and General Dunford have focused on in the Army, more than end strength, where we're adding resources this year is to full spectrum training and bringing the total Army back to levels of readiness that are necessary. And if I can loop back to your Special Forces point also, Senator, we have a lot more than 300 Special Forces. It's not like we have to make these people. We're sending them there. We have tens of thousands of Special Forces. Excellent people, yes, exquisitely trained people, but it's not like we don't have them to apply to Syria. We're applying them in the number and the manner that makes sense at this moment. Let me ask if the Chairman wants to add anything on either of those questions.
Senator, the only thing I'd say is that right now, at least in this budget year, I was a lot more concerned with the capability of the force than I was the capacity. In other words, I wasn't satisfied that with the force structure that we currently have, we had sufficient training and equipment, and that was the priority this year, was to focus on the capability of the forces that we have as opposed to the force structure.
I'm concerned that basically there's, and the way you're explaining it, sir, I understand where you're coming from. It just doesn't make sense from my way of trying to analyze this, because General Milley was very clear. He didn't hesitate, because I asked him what it would take for us to be able to defend this great nation and face the imminent threats that we had. And he felt we were woefully short at 980,000 of end strength. He truly did. So if there's a difference, or maybe we can talk in a more secured briefing on this to make sure.
We can, but you're thinking absolutely right. This is a question of balancing investments in force structure, readiness, modernization, as the Chairman said, and that's a balance that we all struck, including General Milley and the leadership of the Army. So, and I just repeat that the principal strategic issue that we are trying to address in the Army budget is not force structure, it is readiness. That's General Milley's and my principal concern in the Army, and I know he testified to that.
My time has expired, but I would just say that basically the dysfunction that we have and the political discourse that we have here in this body and all on top of Capitol Hill here shows you that we must come together for the sake of our country and put our country first in the defense of this country versus our politics. And it's just a shame that we don't get a good budget that doesn't have to make these difficult choices. It's really a shame. I'm sorry for that.
Amen to that. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your appearance before the committee. Secretary Carter, I want to talk about how our counter-ISIS policy has been made. I want to start, though, in the South China Sea before we move on to that policymaking process. You just returned from a trip to the Philippines. We announced several new initiatives. Unfortunately, we've also seen reports that China has begun some reclamation activities on the Scarborough Shoal, which is 120 miles west of Subic Bay. Is it the case that if China were to both reclaim and militarize Scarborough Shoal, they could overwatch all flights out of northern Philippines with radar systems and hold Subic Bay, Luzon Strait, and Manila Bay at risk with missile systems on Scarborough Shoal?
Well, it's precisely because of those kinds of concerns that I was working with the Philippines. They're a treaty ally. We take that seriously, very seriously. That's why we are establishing some new installations from which we can operate so that we strengthen our own posture there. And then that's why we're doing the rebalance in general, which is not just working with the increasing number of allies and partners who are coming to us saying we're concerned about China. So we're getting more and more of that, including places like Vietnam. But it's also why we're sending our best equipment to the Asia Pacific, why we're doing more.
And I understand that, also, Mr. Secretary. It's also why last week I gather there were at least 3 flights conducted in the vicinity of Scarborough Shoal by U.S. aircraft.
I prefer to discuss, have you briefed in that privately, Senator, if you don't mind.
Right, media reports.
But there's no question about it. We will continue to, as I say, fly, sail, and operate wherever international law permits. We do that around the world, and we're not going to stop.
So media reports indicate that those flights did occur, but they did not occur within 12 miles of that feature, which would have been a more assertive action in contesting China's claims. Now I want to leave the South China Sea, but ascend to this point about the policymaking process.
Could I interrupt the Senator a second? This is the second time, Secretary Carter, that you've refused to confirm what is well known in the media. That's not fair to this committee. It's all been reported that there were flights into the area around those islands. And why you would refuse to confirm that when it's already been in the media is, I think, not the proper deference that this committee is owed.
I'm only refusing because I believe it's classified information, Senator, but I believe
Actually,
it is.
I'm glad the chairman pointed it out, but I think it raises the point that I want to go on to now from your two predecessors, Secretary Gates and Secretary Panetta, about the nature of national security decision-making policy. Secretary Gates recently said that Obama's foreign policy is, quote, not as bad as it sounds. It's the way it comes out that diminishes its effectiveness. The way things get done communicates reluctance to assert American power. They often end up in the right place, but a day late and a dollar short. The decisions are made seriatim. It presents an image that President Obama is being dragged kicking and screaming to each new stage, and it dilutes the implementation of what he's done. It becomes so incremental that the message is lost. It makes them look reluctant, end quote. Secretary Panetta, quote, I think what I've seen in the last 4 years is almost this cautiousness and overcorrection, which makes it appear that the United States is hesitant to take action, and that sends, I think, a message of weakness, end quote. So both in our actions in the South China Sea, where we may or may not be flying these missions, where we may or may not be going inside the protected 12-mile territorial ring, but also in the most recent announcement that we're going to deploy troops to Syria, but only 250 troops. What would you comment on Secretary Panetta and Secretary Gates' position about how this policy is being made?
I can't obviously speak for them or for the time that they were secretary. I can only speak from my own experience, and I'll ask the chairman to do the same. I am forthright, as I told you I would be when you confirmed me as Secretary of Defense, in giving the President my best advice. I'm also absolutely committed to making sure he gets professional military advice. That's where the chairman comes in. I've never failed to have a hearing for my views, and you asked, and you raised one particular, which I already addressed in my hearing. The additional SOF in Syria, their numbers and their mission was precisely what the chairman and I recommended. What we announced last week was precisely what the chairman and I recommended. What he approved in last fall, what we called the accelerants of that time, was what the chairman and I recommended to him. Now, that doesn't mean he's always going to approve our recommendations. I'm just giving you those as examples. He is the commander-in-chief, but we tell it straight to the best of our ability. I can certainly speak for myself, but in observation, can speak for the chairman as well. I obviously can't speak for my distinguished predecessors and the experience that they made.
And I will address one final question, General Dunford here, which again goes back to Secretary Gates and Secretary Panetta's comments. They both attribute this grudging, halting, hesitating exercise of American power to the large size of the President's national security staff and the micromanagement. Secretary Gates saying, for example, it was the operational micromanagement that drove me nuts, of the White House and NSC staffers calling senior commanders out in the field and asking them questions, of second-guessing commanders. General Dunford, could you comment on your experience, both in your current role and in previous roles, about your relationship with the national security staff?
Senator, I guess what I'd focus on is my relationship and access to the President. In both my previous role and this role, I have had the opportunity to provide best military advice. With regard to the national security staff, I didn't deal with the national security staff in my previous assignment, and in fact was specifically prescribed from doing that by the Secretary of Defense, which I think was appropriate. I don't think I should have been dealing with the national security staff in my previous assignment. And in my current role, I don't deal with the national security staff except the national security advisor and the principal deputy national security advisors on a routine basis, and my access is unfettered in that regard. I don't go through the national security staff.
Thank you.
I don't want to belabor the point, Mr. Secretary, but to classify the fact that we are sending our ships and airplanes into international waters and have that classified when it should be magnified throughout the world that the United States is asserting our respect and adherence to international law is something that is confusing and befuddling. Why would we want to classify the fact that we are doing what every nation in the world should be able to do, and that's sail or fly wherever we want to? Why should that be classified information?
It's a fair point, and I'll look into why, what aspects of these operations are classified. I'm just respectful of the process, so I'm not going to talk about the details of operations. But there's no question that and I've said it many, many times, I say it again today, we fly, sail, and operate wherever international law permits. We exercise that right routinely. The operational details of a particular flight, it's a fair question why or what parts of it are classified. I'll go back and look into it, but I'm careful about disclosing classified information or information I believe is classified, not to this committee, because you all have access to it in the right setting, but not this setting. And the fact that something's in the newspaper doesn't make it unclassified, as we all know.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For just a few minutes, Mr. Secretary, I want to look a little bit beyond Iraq and Syria and discuss our plan to fight the threats of extremism globally. When we've asked you and other witnesses to talk about our strategy against ISIS, we often get a response detailing the 9 lines of effort that have been outlined by the President. Is it your understanding that those 9 lines of effort comprise the strategy to defeat ISIS? And is it solely to ISIS, or is that our strategy for the global efforts against terrorism?
Well, there's a lot of good sense to the 9 lines formulation that was first made 2 years ago. I would say that while they're all still valid, they basically name the parts of the campaign, political, economic, military, that need to be taken. I would also say we've moved beyond that conceptual framework now and have a more operational framework, the one that in Syria and Iraq I've described. But it still remains true. If you go back to the 9 lines of effort, there are things like interrupting ISIL's finances. We're still doing that, working with people to do that. That's not the Department of Defense, but the Department of Treasury, Department of State, and so forth. Foreign fighter flows, we have a role in that, but a lot of other countries and other parts of our government have a role. So it's still a good taxonomy of the total number of efforts. But I would say we've moved beyond that in specificity in the last couple of years.
Is that the primary framework for the rest of the global fight against terrorism? Those 9 lines?
Again, that's a good broad framework, but we've gotten much more operational in our approach, including in individual locations, in addition to Syria and Iraq.
Let me ask you some information that just came out today, so you know what you're not familiar with, that's okay. It was reported that the truce with the Russians is on the verge of collapse. Senior administration officials quoted that no clear path ahead in Syria. The situation on the ground is murky. We saw that there have just been airstrikes in Aleppo that destroyed a hospital, killing at least 14 patients and staff. We know the Syrian Air Force and the Russians have stepped up raids in that area against the rebel factions. They talked about catastrophic deterioration in Aleppo in the last few days. It seems we're further away from a workable plan in Syria than in a very long time. Exactly what are we going to do to try to move this forward? It appears it's heading in the other direction.
That is precisely what Secretary Kerry is working on and discussing with all the parties. And I can't speak to overnight developments, but he is both working on the cessation of hostilities itself, and most importantly, and to get back to what we were discussing earlier, on the political resolution of the Syrian civil war. And I'll leave it to him to comment on that.
Well, I was in Iraq about a month ago, right before heat was taken, and we were working with the Sunni tribal leaders there. Do you see that continuing to move in the right direction? And are we leaving people behind? One of their concerns was the governance in those towns once they took them back.
A very good question, and it is very important that the stabilization take place after the recapture of these cities. That's been going on in Ramadi. I'll ask the chairman if he wants to add more to that. Resettling people, getting the water back on, getting the power back on, getting schools back open, clearing the IEDs, which these really evil ISIL people wire in people's homes and so forth. When they come back, takes a long time to clear. That's essential. We've worked on that in Ramadi. We've worked on that in Heat. And when I was talking about the necessary political and economic complements, and to get back to your 9 lines of effort, we can do all we're doing militarily, and I'm confident that we're on the right track there. But that victory can't be sustained unless the local people have the wherewithal to resettle. And with the political situation in Iraq and the economic situation owing particularly to oil prices, that's fragile.
I'm about out of time, but I just want to mention again that in Syria, as we're trying to move ISIS out of Raqqa, trying to accomplish that at the same time that Aleppo seems to be going into deeper problems, greater flames, more trouble, that whatever Secretary Kerry is working on, the stage actually seems to be heading in the other direction instead of moving forward. And then just finally, as an aside, we still hope you can make it to Crane. We know how busy you are. But in Syria, most recent developments seem to be heading more against our goals than for our goals. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I want to begin with a compliment, Mr. Secretary, to you and the President for the quality of the generals that you are nominating and asking to lead our military. That many have come through this. They've all come through this committee, and very impressive. General Dunford, on March 19th, there was a Marine Corps Staff Sergeant, part of BLT 26 Artillery Marine, who was killed in Iraq. Was he killed in action? Killed in combat?
He was killed in combat, Senator.
We had in January, a staff sergeant from the 19th Special Forces Group was killed in Afghanistan. Was he killed in combat?
Master Sergeant Wheeler was killed in combat, Senator.
When our JSOC troops conduct CT missions in that part of the world, are they conducting combat operations?
They are, Senator.
How about when our F-22s, F-16s, A-10s are doing bombing missions in Iraq and Syria? Are they conducting combat missions?
They are, Senator.
So, Mr. Secretary, my question is pretty simple. It's the President, the White House spokesman, even just this past week, whenever they talk about our troops in the Middle East, they go to great lengths, and this is a quote from the President, "They will not involve American combat troops fighting on foreign soil." This is the White House spokesman recently. Our troops are not in a combat role. Why does the administration go through these crazy somersaults that the entire country knows is not correct to say our troops are not in combat when they're in combat? The chairman of the Joint Chiefs just stated that pretty much everybody in the Middle East is in combat. So why does the President not level with the American people? Why does the White House spokesman continually just say they're not in combat? I think one thing, and I'd like to answer that question, but I also think it diminishes the sacrifice of our troops and their families to, we know they're in combat. Why can't we level with the American people and say they're in combat? The chairman just did.
Yeah, I'm going to associate myself with the chairman. These people are in combat, Senator, and I think that we need to say that clearly. I don't know what statements you're quoting, but I can well imagine that the point being made is to describe the strategy that I described earlier, which is to not to try to substitute for local forces, but to get back to Senator Donnelly's point, to try to get them powerful enough that they can expel ISIL with our support. And when we provide that support, we put people in harm's way. We ask them to conduct combat actions. I mean, a pilot flying over
dropping bombs.
Iraq, dropping bombs is certainly in that circumstance.
So
I think that's what's being gotten at. But
I think it'd be useful to maybe pass on from, your two perspectives to the White House, to the president, to his spokespeople, to the people who background the press. I mean, even last week, 250 new special forces troops going to the Middle East, but they're not in combat roles. Well, that's actually not true. I think leveling with this committee, leveling with the American people is very useful. I know the two of you are doing that, but if you can pass that message on to the president and his spokespeople in the White House, I think that would be useful. I want to turn to follow-up.
Can I thank you, by the way, for what you said about the unbelievable officers
it's not just
that we
General
have.
Dunford, it's General Milley,
a
it's
whole bunch of them. We're country's blessed.
I'd like to turn to follow up on Senator Cotton's line of questionings. And, I'm going to hand out a document here that shows a little bit more detail what's going on in the South China Sea, as you're well aware, Mr. Secretary, Mr. Chairman. But there's a lot of concern that the Scarborough Shoal has very important strategic significance with regard to what some people are calling a strategic triangle in the South China Sea. The Chinese have already established 2 legs of that triangle. The fighters and radars are part of that radius that you see around the Scarborough Shoal. What is the strategic significance if the Chinese do start to build up the military capability on that island, particularly being so close to the Philippines? And what are our plans if they do begin that kind of militarization or even buildup of the island? And do we have a plan to respond to the UN tribunal ruling that's expected in June with regard to China's excessive maritime claims? There's a lot going on there, and I'd appreciate just an answer to those questions.
Sure, there is, and I should say also thank you for your role and leadership in this part of the world. It's a critical one. And the Middle East is in the headlines all the time, and justifiably so, but this is the region where half of humankind lives and half of the world's economy, so it's critical. And your map's absolutely accurate. And to get to your various questions, the United States is reacting. That's what our rebalance is all about. There are many things that we work with China on, but there are certain aspects of Chinese behavior that are very disturbing to us. They're deeply disturbing to countries in the region, which has them all coming to us and is having the effect of causing self-isolation by China. We are reacting ourselves, and we're being increasingly invited to work with countries, long-standing allies and strong allies like the Philippines, and that's where the sites you see and correctly have on the map here come in, but also new partners like Vietnam. I was in India a week and a half ago, many of them concerned about Chinese behavior. And I'll just
Mr. Secretary, I'm sorry to cut you off here, but the strategic significance of the Scarborough Shoal right now in the South China Sea, there's a lot going on there. You were just there. Can you comment on that?
Well, it's a piece of disputed territory that like other disputes in that region, has the potential to lead to military conflict. That's particularly concerning to us, given its proximity to the Philippines. But we have the same view about all these disputes. And by the way, even though China is by far and away in the recent times the greatest reclaimer and militarization of disputed features, other countries are doing it as well. And just I don't represent our diplomatic position, but our diplomatic position, to get back to what you said about the tribunal, is that these disputes ought to be settled peacefully, and one of the ways of doing that is through the tribunal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You would support lifting of restrictions on provision of weapons to the Vietnamese?
We've discussed this in the past, and I appreciate your leadership in that regard, Chairman, and yes.
Senator Donnelly. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator McCaskill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The funding for United States Forces Korea and the rebalance to the Pacific is in the base budget.
It is.
I support the European Reassurance Initiative. I was just there and talked to many of the important military commanders in the European Command, many of the important leaders in the European Command. I support it. But let's be clear. The only reason it's in OCO is because of the budget caps, correct?
Well, I think it was put into OCO originally because it...
I think the chairman referenced this last year when he said it's in OCO because it's like what the bank robber said. He said a bank robber, nobody remembered
the
who
Willie
it was.
Sutton
Right.
Yeah, no, there's
That's
something.
where the money is?
There's something to that. I mean, to be fair, I wasn't around at the time, but when the thing first came up in Crimea, urgent money was required, and so money was moved within OCO, which is easier to do than in the base. But you're right, the years go on, and then you say, why is this money in ERI?
Yeah. There's no difference between the rebalance to the Pacific and the European Reassurance Initiative, correct?
I'm afraid that you're right. That I only say I'm afraid
So the
because
only
what that means is that Putin's Russia is here to stay.
Let me be clear here. The only reason they're in two different budgets is an artificial cap put on by Congress to try to pretend to the American people that we're balancing something.
Well,
you don't have to comment on that. I just wanted that on the record. It just is so irritating to me that we can't be honest. Talking about being honest with the American people, how about being honest with the American people what we're doing about the base budget in the military? I am so tired of so many members of Congress saying, oh, we want to support the want to support the military. We want to support the military. And then we're shoving all these things in OCO that don't belong in OCO. And the reason they're doing it is because they can pretend they're paying for it and pretend they're balancing something. It just is so irritating to me. I wanted to get that on the record first.
Do you feel better now?
I do.
Thank you.
And I know you relate.
I do.
In fact, I think
can I get in this too? I feel
totally
better
agree.
also when you say that.
I actually
Totally
think
agree.
I think the chairman totally agrees with me.
Absolutely.
We just need more people to quit being hypocrites about balancing a budget and be honest about what it takes to be fiscally responsible as it relates to our budget and military. Sinai Peninsula, General Dunford, I know that you were just with Sisi. I am worried about the international peacekeeping initiative on the Sinai that's there, but to enforce the agreements back in the late 70s between Israel and Egypt. And there have been incidents, there have been Americans hurt. Tell me what you can about your sense of Egypt being capable of continuing to sustain and protect this peacekeeping mission.
Senator, a couple of points. First, I have looked at this very closely over the last few months, and while absolutely committed to remaining in the Sinai Peninsula to enforce the Camp David Accords, we, of course, are concerned about the protection of our forces, and we've already taken a number of steps to include providing them additional equipment and adjusting their posture to increase their force protection level. I am not satisfied. We're where we need to be right now, and so we're working very closely with the Israelis, working very closely with the Egyptians to take some steps that will further enhance our force protection. And if I'm not satisfied, that we can properly address our force protection, which really includes two things, Senator. It includes adjusting our posture as well as addressing the terrorists that are in that environment and making sure we have an effective counterterrorism plan in the Sinai as well in conjunction with the Egyptians. If those two conditions aren't met, then I'll have some recommendations to the Secretary and the President about what we do moving forward. But it is very sensitive right now, the discussions. I'd like to talk to you in private about my conversation with the Egyptians over the weekend and the number of conversations with the Egyptians and the Israelis over the last couple of months. But we're working very closely because it is a trilateral issue. We're working very closely to address those two issues. You know, number one, the immediate posture of our force. But as importantly, I think both of these things are necessary for us to be satisfied that we've done all we can do for our men and women that are there. The second piece is to have an effective plan to deal with the terrorists in the region. There is clearly a strong presence of the Islamic State in the Sinai, as well as an insurgency that has been going on in the Sinai for some time.
Thank you, General. I'll look forward to that and learning more. I'm very concerned about it. Finally, assistance to Jordan. I don't think people realize in America there has been a hue and cry about 10,000 Syrian refugees. There's 1.4 million in Jordan. Makes up 13% of their population. They closed the border last year because of it, because of the imbalance that was occurring within their country. I had an opportunity to be in Jordan a few weeks ago, visited with both our military, our terrific military leaders there, and also with the Jordanian military. I am worried about the 15,000 people along that border that are now sitting there because they're not being allowed to come into Jordan. And as you all focus on northern Syria, I'm wondering what, if anything, you can tell me in this setting, and maybe this is also for a closed setting, because most of what I've learned would be appropriate in a closed setting, about the drifting of ISIS and ISIL to the southern region along this border where we now have 15,000 people just on the other side of the border from Jordan.
Thanks. I'll say a few things about it. We can talk more in another setting. I'll ask the chairman to chime in. But first of all, thanks for going there and seeing our guys and gals and also our fantastic partners in the Jordanians. And you're right that on a per capita basis, they've absorbed this enormous refugee situation. And yes, we were actually talking a lot about the northern parts of both Iraq and Syria, but we're very mindful of both southern Iraq and southern Syria, and the possibility that as we apply pressure to the north in both Mosul and Raqqa, that ISIL will, as the expression goes, squirt out toward the south. We talked to the Jordanians about that, talked to the Iraqis about that, and we talked to the Israelis, by the way, about that as well, and work with them. And we do have operations that we're facilitating with Iraq, for example, in the direction of Rutbah to the southwest, even as we help them move up the Tigris Valley to the north. And, Chairman, you want to add anything to that?
Senator, Jordan is clearly one of our more important partners in the region, and we have a strong military-to-military relationship with Jordan. So part of what we're doing is increasing their capacity and supporting them. And then the 1209 program we spoke about earlier, which is from the NDA, which is designed to allow us to grow effective indigenous ground forces to take the fight to the enemy, in this case from Jordan into Syria. We also have an active 1209 program down in the Jordan-Syrian border area that I think you were probably briefed on during your
Correct. Thank you very much. Thank you both. Thank you for your service, and we're very proud of you. And we're going to do everything, I'm going to do everything I can to get what you need in the base budget where it belongs.
In Senator McCaskill's shy and retiring manner, he will do that. Thank you for your passion, Senator McCaskill.
Takes one to know.
I totally agree with your dissatisfaction, and I agree with you. We're deceiving the American people, and that's not good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for appearing again in front of this committee to discuss the Department of Defense's Middle East policy. And thank you also for the brave young men and women you represent, stationed in the United States and all across the world. This debate in our committee is a difficult one because many of our concerns have to do with broad strategic decisions being made outside the Department of Defense. However, until the administration reforms its strategy to acknowledge the unpleasant realities of the Middle East, and recognize that America's security interests are and what exactly the United States strategies are and are not in these conflicts. I think Congress needs to be very cautious as we contemplate any further funding requests from the Department of Defense or any other national security agency. General Dunford, as President Obama reiterated in his meetings with European leaders this week, the United States counter-ISIS strategy ultimately relies on peaceful transfer of power in Syria from Assad's regime to an inclusive government there. Now, while certainly admirable, it's far from realistic. As Middle East journalist Thanasis Kambanis wrote in the New York Times 2 weeks ago, quote, Syria, one of the most important states in the Arab world, has cracked up, and no peace settlement can put it back together, close quote. In your professional opinion, General Dunford, what do you think the chances are that the sort of reconciliation and political unity sought by the Obama administration can happen in Syria, just given the amount of violence that we've seen there over the last 4 years, the competing outside interests, and the sectarian context of this fight? And what is the intelligence that we're collecting tend to indicate about the possible willingness of these groups to come together to form some sort of government?
Senator, I think the most difficult challenge in forming a new government is dealing with the role of Assad. And I can tell you asked about the opposition groups, that they're absolutely adamant, and that's what the intelligence tells us. They're absolutely adamant that Assad have no future role in Syria. And so until and unless the grievances of the civil war are addressed by these opposition forces, then I'd find it hard to imagine a successful political transition.
If a political solution to the Syrian conflict continues to elude diplomats in Geneva, there will not be a political sovereign to unite the various rebels who we know through previous testimony often have competing or conflicting, perhaps mutually inconsistent long-term goals as well as ideals. Secretary Carter, what will become of the weapons and the equipment that we've provided to these rebel groups if a peaceful resolution of this conflict remains out of reach? And will we simply have dumped hundreds of millions of dollars worth of equipment and worth of weapons into an already volatile situation?
I'll answer the general question, then we can go into more specifics, but I can't answer the general. In everything we do in there as elsewhere, we always think ahead when we're providing weaponry to a group about sort of what's the future, what's the next step. So we certainly have thought about that in that region as well. To your bigger question, which is what is the role of, I think what you're saying is what we would call the moderate opposition in the future of Syria. Our strategy, political strategy, and the one that Secretary Kerry is pursuing is that Assad leaves, the structures of the government remain in place, but without Assad, and that the moderate opposition becomes part of the government, and there is a government that can give the Syrian people what they deserve, which is a country that runs and a country that's moderate and a country that treats its people decently. We're a long way from that now, but that's the vision for Syria. And so these people have a role, is the point.
And you think that's a realistic vision, one that we could realistically achieve within the necessary time?
I think it's a necessary one to achieve because I think Assad can't be part of the future of that country.
But what if he doesn't go? Right. What if he doesn't leave?
This is why it's so important that the Russians keep their commitment, which is to a political transition there. They're the ones that have the most leverage over Assad right now. It's very important that they do that because, as the chairman indicated, there's no resolution of the Syrian civil war until that occurs.
Thank you.
Well, thank you both for being here, Secretary Carter and General Dunford, and for your service and for dealing with what is a very big challenge for this country and for most of the civilized world. I want to follow up on Senator McCaskill's comments about Jordan and the number of refugees that they have taken in, because Lebanon is another country in the Middle East that has taken in a significant number of refugees. I think about a quarter of their population now are refugees. And I noticed there was a story in this morning's news about the Lebanese army killing an ISIS leader who was operating out of Lebanon along the border with Syria. Can you talk about the importance of the military contribution that some of our partners in the Middle East are making to the fight against ISIS?
I can. You mentioned the Jordanians. The Jordanians are great partners in every respect, and the Lebanese armed forces as well. We've had a long-standing role in supporting them. I believe General Dunford knows that much better than I do, and perhaps you can speak to that. I can't speak to overnight developments in that regard, but let me ask the chairman if he wants to add anything about our support for the LAF over time, Lebanese armed forces over time.
Senator, we've had for years, and I was a component commander in the United States Central Command working with the Lebanese Armed Forces. We've had for years a strong military-to-military relationship with the Lebanese Armed Forces, and I think particularly today it's important that we continue that, and they have been, partners in the fight against ISIL right now, and it's important we continue to support them.
Thank you. I would also just like to point out something that, as we're talking about refugees and the humanitarian situation, we had an interesting hearing before the Foreign Operations Subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee with Bono, who connected humanitarian aid to our national security, and I think that's an important connection that we too often don't recognize, that if we are supporting refugees who are in Jordan or in Lebanon, and we can keep them in the Middle East so they can go home to Syria once the fighting ends, it's a lot better for us and it's better for them than not supporting those efforts and continuing to support the conflict. Let me ask you, I know there's been some discussion about what Russia is doing, and of course they had a very well-publicized announcement about their withdrawal from Syria last month, but there remains a significant Russian ground and air force in Syria. Do we know what they're doing? Can you tell us, are there any indications that they intend to depart in whole anytime soon?
But we do watch them. We do know what we're doing. You are right that it was far from a complete withdrawal, despite how it was ballyhooed initially. And with respect to their specific operations, we obviously keep very close eye on that, know it extremely well. Let me see if the chairman wants to add anything to that.
The only thing I'd say, Senator, is I have not seen a significant reduction in forces by the Russians, nor have I seen less support for the regime than there was before they announced that reduction. So, as I look at it, despite some rotation of forces and so forth, it seems to me pretty much status quo today relative to before the announcement.
And given the ceasefires really ending in Syria and the increased conflict, is there any reason to believe that we can work with Russia to try and get people back to the negotiating table, to try and get back to a real ceasefire again, and to make any progress on a transition in Syria?
That's the aim and the path that Secretary Kerry's on. He's the authority on on that and has been managing that, but that's precisely what he's trying to accomplish.
Well, I appreciate that he's managing that, but obviously one of the significant factors in encouraging Syria to do that is the success of the military efforts there, and Assad being able to see that he doesn't have a path to continue staying in power.
Well, I'll just repeat what I said before. That's why when Russia, that's why there's such a difference between what Russia said it was going to do and what it did. They said they were going to contribute to the ending of the Syrian civil war, and that propping up Assad militarily is not doing that and has not done that. And they also said they were going to fight ISIL, but they were mostly propping up Assad, no doubt about it.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you all. Secretary Carter, have you ever heard of the PYD?
I have, yes.
Who are they?
They're a Kurdish group, one of several, a number of.
Have you heard of the YPG?
I have heard of them also.
Who are they?
Another Kurdish group.
Aren't they the military wing of the PYD?
They are, yes.
Is that right, General Dunford?
That is correct.
They're a leftist Syrian Kurdish political party founded in 2003. Reports indicate that they're aligned or at least have substantial ties to the PKK. Is that true?
Yes, we haven't.
Is the PKK a terrorist organization in the eyes of the Turkish government?
The PKK is a terrorist organization not only in the eyes of the Turkish government, but in the eyes of the U.S. government as well, Senator.
Is it surprising to you that the Turks may be upset with us by arming the YPG in Syria, since they're so closely aligned with the PKK?
No, it's not. No, it's not at all, Senator. We have, let me just clarify, let me just say that, and the chairman's been involved in this as well. We have extensive consultations with the Turks.
So Turkey's okay with this?
They're not okay with that.
I just got back from Turkey. They're not okay with this. They think this is the dumbest idea in the world, and I agree with them. Okay. How many of the Syrian Democratic Forces, or whatever we're talking about, are Kurds versus Arabs, General Dunford?
There's about 6,000 Arabs, Senator.
Well, what percentage of the force is that?
That's about 20%.
Okay. So if you're wondering why Turkey's a little upset, we're arming people inside of Syria aligned with a terrorist group that's fighting the Turkish government. Turkey could do more, but I think this whole concept is, quite frankly, absurd. I just got back from Saudi Arabia. They believe that they're not going into Syria as long as they think Assad's going to win and Damascus will be controlled by the Iranians. Have they ever expressed to you their displeasure with our policies toward Assad?
Oh, I'll take that. But I do want to get back to the Turks, though. Mm-hmm. Thanks for going there. Thanks for talking to them. They're a NATO ally. It's real important. And we do discuss with them our effort to, which is an important effort and one that's important to protecting
Secretary
ourselves.
Carter, I've got 2 minutes left. I'm not asking you to tell me what they told me. I know what they told me. They may have told you something different.
Well,
I know
let me go on to the Saudis, because
the Saudis,
because
yes. Do they
I was
have a
just
real
there
problem with our policy toward Assad?
I think the Saudis, having been there just last week, had the same problem we do, which is that Assad is still there.
Is it fair to say that the Saudis and every Gulf Arab state believes that Assad is firmly entrenched because of the Russian-Iranian backing?
Again, that's an observation that we would make and did make with the Saudis. We agree with that. That's where the Russians need to change their tune.
Our goal is to destroy ISIL and to replace Assad. On the Assad side, he's more firmly in power than ever. January the 20th, 2017, President Obama will leave office. Is it likely that Assad will be in power?
I hope not.
Okay. I think it's likely he will be, because hope's not a strategy. Plan B.
Secretary Kerry says there's a plan B if the ceasefire falls apart, that he's let the Russians know, we're going to try it nice, but if the ceasefire falls apart, there's a plan B. Do you have a plan B for Assad?
I'm going to let Secretary Kerry speak to the,
Well, but I mean,
his
he has the
diplomacy.
State Department. The State Department's not going to go take Assad out. Is there a military component to Plan B?
I think what the again, I don't.
Or is Plan B just BS?
I don't, I'm sure there's not BS.
Have you talked to the Secretary of State
Of course,
about a military change in
yes, of course.
strategy?
And without speaking for him, Senator, I think what he's saying is that the United
No,
States.
my question is, have you had a discussion with the Secretary of State about a change in military strategy if the ceasefire falls apart regarding Assad and Russia? Have you had that discussion?
We have had many discussions about
Is there a plan B?
changes of strategy.
Is there a Plan B?
I wouldn't call it a Plan B, but I'm going to let him speak
Outline the
for
change
his.
in military strategy.
We have discussed alternative strategies.
What are they?
With respect to
What are they?
Syria. Some of them I'm prepared to discuss here, some of them I'm not.
Well, let's have a
As you
classified
well
hearing,
know,
Mr. Chairman, about this.
As you well know, the entirety of what goes on in Syria is not something we can discuss here, as you
Okay,
well know.
I don't want to put you on, I like you. I'm not, finally, General Dunford. Is this the Dunford plan to destroy ISIL, or is this the plan that General Dunford came up with, given the constraints put on him by the White House?
Senator, when I came in last October, there was a strategy. We made some recommendations last October to accelerate our progress against ISIL. Those recommendations were accepted by the President, and I would say I'm in my job 7 months, so I own it.
Okay, good. So I just want the whole country to know this, that the President's goal is to destroy ISIL. I share that goal. I know you do too. The military strategy that we're embarked on is the best way to destroy ISIL, and it's what you recommended. Or is it limited by conditions put on you by the White House?
Senator, to clarify, so if I say...
Would you do more if you could?
I would do more if I could, but the limitation is not just a political limitation. Part of it is our partners on the ground.
Right.
But I just want to clarify, if what you're saying is the strategy, meaning a by, with, and through indigenous partners on the ground being the methodology for securing territory and defeating ISIL, I support that.
So you think the YPG are going to liberate a 80% Kurdish ground force is going to take ISIL, Raqqa away from ISIL and hold it?
The YPG have secured a large, predominantly Kurdish
That's
area
not
in
my
northeast
question.
Syria.
Are they going to be able to take Raqqa, Syria away from ISIL and hold it? 80% Kurdish.
They will not in and of themselves,
Thank
Senator.
On behalf of the chairman, let me recognize Senator Kane.
Mr. Chair, could I defer to Senator King and trade places?
Absolutely. Senator King, please.
Thank you. Several observations based upon this excellent hearing. Number one, I want to associate myself with the chairman's comments about Afghanistan. I think the concern is that a decision has to be made in the next several months. I don't think we're going to learn anything in the next several months that we don't know now, because the drawdown, the scheduled drawdown, is going to have to start late this summer, early fall to make the January deadline. I sincerely hope that, given where we are, given the level of violence, given the really, I think, surprising, or I shouldn't say surprising, but the effectiveness of the Afghan forces, we ought to provide the support necessary, including the authorities, to maintain what we've gained there, which has been considerable. That's number one. Number two, a lot of talk here today about end strength. I've learned from talking to senior military officials, particularly in the Army, that readiness is as important as end strength. That you can have a big number, but if you've got 50% readiness or 30% or 60%, that's really important. So I think that's an important consideration. Finally, on the law of the sea, on China and the chart that we saw, it would really help, in my view, if we were members of the Law of the Sea Treaty, so we could be at the tribunal that's making these decisions. On the last point, Mr. Secretary, do you agree?
I do, yes. And I'm in the long line of defense officials who have, and Navy officers who have supported that agreement. We're not party to it, but we do respect its provisions.
It's not in our national interest to not be at the table, it seems to me.
Again, people have sat in this chair and testified for many years in favor of that treaty, but that has not carried the day.
Secretary Carter, the most disturbing thing you've said today that, in my view, is you sort of touched on it and then we went by in the hearing and never got back to it. You suggested there's been a rise of ethno-sectarianism in Baghdad. If that's the case, number one, that's a disaster because that was what the Maliki policy is what laid the groundwork for what happened with ISIL. Number two, what can we do about it, and are we trying to do something about it? And I'm not talking about just jawboning. Are we talking specific, direct pressure, if you will, on the Iraqi government? Because if Baghdad isn't inclusive, then this whole enterprise is just not going to be successful.
Yeah, well, what I was referring to is the turbulence in Baghdad, or just over the last couple of weeks, in which the Prime Minister has been contending with a variety of the opposition parties. That's a serious concern to us because the integrity of the Iraqi state is an important part of the end state our strategy seeks. We support the Prime Minister Abadi in his overall approach, which is a multi-sectarian, as he says.
Is he backsliding on that? Because in several hearings I've been told he's doing the right thing, he wants to do the right thing. Are we losing ground on that?
I had a conversation with him just a week and a half, and we were completely aligned on what we're trying to do there with respect to our campaign. But it's also true that he is contending with a very complicated mix there. And with respect to your question, what are we doing about it? In addition to providing political support, I want to reiterate the importance of the economic support. And that's not just by the United States, but by others as well. So when I was with the President in Riyadh last week, we were urging the Gulf states, that's a place that they could contribute. Don't cede Baghdad to Iran. Get in the game, support a multi-sectarian approach. That's what Abadi is trying to stand for. That's what Maliki didn't stand for. And it's important to support him, both politically and economically. And the economic situation is particularly important today in view of the low oil prices.
Concern about the Mosul Dam. Are you satisfied that the Italian contractor and the arrangement that's been made by the government in Iraq is sufficient and is going to be timely? It would be an absolute catastrophe if that dam went out.
It is. It is the best practices outfit to do grouting at the dam. And with respect to the timing question, that is the concern we all have, to get that grouting done as soon as possible to mitigate the risk that there are failures in the dam before the grouting is complete and this dam can be shored up.
One more quick question. General Dunford, we talked about how ISIL has been degraded, and that seems to be the consensus that I'm hearing in the last few weeks in terms of briefings in various settings. Are they being degraded in terms of equipment as well as finances, manpower, foreign fighters? Where are they getting their equipment?
Senator, there is, as you can imagine, in Iraq in particular, there's no lack of AK-47s and weapons that have been left behind as a result of years of war. And I think primarily they got them from the former Iraqi soldiers, brought their weapons with them in large ammunition stores that they seized in the early days of the war. You'll recall they had pretty significant progress 2 years ago in grabbing ground and territory, and part of that ground was ammunition depots and weapons storage areas and so forth from the Iraqis.
Are they being squeezed now on that front, though?
Very, very much so, Senator. I mean, I would say that their freedom of movement has been reduced. Their ability to resupply with foreign fighters and equipment has been reduced, in addition to the resources that you spoke about. And so I would say that their military capability has been degraded to include their equipment.
Do we have any information that their morale is declining?
We do, Senator, and that's an important point. In fact, of my observations on my recent trip and really over the last few months, I think one of the more significant things I see is the relative morale of the Iraqi security forces and the Peshmerga versus ISIL. And we see in the intelligence and anecdotally from our commanders that the morale and the spirit of ISIL has eroded over time as a result of their battlefield losses and as a result of the fact that their pay has been cut significantly because of the resources constraints that the leadership has.
Always a negative effect on morale.
Has a negative effect on morale.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you. On behalf of Chairman McCain, Senator Tillis, please.
Thank you, Senator Reid, Secretary Carter, and General Dunford. Thank you for being here. I went on a CODEL during the recess and was in Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. And one of the feelings that I got in speaking with a number of the leaders there was a sense that I think everyone recognizes at some point, if we take advantage of maybe some of the degraded status of ISIS, at least in that region, that ultimately once we take ground, we're going to have to hold it. And for us to hold it, we're going to have people present there that are hopefully not men and women in American uniforms. And it's going to come from the coalition, the partners in the Middle East. But the sense I got is they're not, I mean, they want to be prepared to do it, but they are not necessarily prepared to take the kind of fight and have the kind of presence in Syria that we're going to need. Do you agree with that assessment, General Dunford or Secretary Carter? And what specific actions are we taking to prepare the Saudis, for example, to be able to play a role in that along with the Iraqis and the other partners in the region?
I'll start off, having just been in Saudi Arabia, and speak to the Saudis and then ask the chairman to jump in. I think that, I don't want to speak for them, but from our conversations, they have some of the same view we do, which is in the end, it can't be them or us, it has to be local people. But they want to join the campaign and play a role. The only thing I'd say is we always have to remember this is a two-way street. So the people whom you think you're helping have to welcome your help, and that can be an issue. That's why it's so important to navigate the complex shoals of Baghdad politics that we were discussing earlier, because we do everything with the permission and through the Iraqi government. And in Syria, there obviously is no government with which we can cooperate, but we still need local forces who live there and want to live there. That's why, to get back to Senator Graham's point, he's absolutely right. Kurds are not the right people to take and govern Raqqa. We know that. We are looking to identify and then enable Syrian Arab forces that would be the appropriate people to take and govern Raqqa, because the people have to accept they're liberators, and that you can't just come in and say you're the liberator. They have to believe that, or you'll get the kind of violent backlash. So the Saudis and others in the region understand that dynamic. We're looking for their help, finally, not only in terms of military help, but this is where their economic and stabilization assistance can be so important. So if the Gulf states would help the Sunni lands being taken back by the Iraqi security forces, that would be it would help the state of Iraq. As I mentioned earlier, it's a counterweight to what is clearly Iranian influence in Iraq, and we think Iraq ought to be a multi-sectarian place, not an Iranian place or anything.
Your response lets me maybe further refine the question. What I'm more concerned with, General, you as a warfighter, is the level of capability. The Saudis, we'll use the Saudis as an example. Since I was there, they seem to have very good capabilities in the air, not really that good capabilities by our standards on the ground. So to put them in a situation where they're partners with Iraq, or to put them in a situation where, when we finally gain the momentum to try and eradicate ISIS from Syria, I'm wondering if their level of readiness is approaching anything that would make that possible with them as a key partner, and Iraq for that matter.
Senator, I think each of our partners in the Gulf states have certain capabilities that could be employed to good effect in Syria, were they to have the will to do that.
And I guess the final question is, in my time in Egypt, I was aware of the presence of ISIS, or as they prefer to call them, Daesh, and Sinai is growing and kind of as a hub in that area. It seems to me a part of the mission that we have to conclude successfully in Syria is to make sure they are either captured or killed in Syria and do not regroup and refortify somewhere else. I assume that's a part of the strategy. Is there anything specifically you can talk about here?
It is, and let me ask the chairman specifically to talk about Sinai because he's been working so intently upon that. But your point is absolutely right about the Gulf states in the sense that their capabilities to operate, particularly against asymmetric threats in the region, is an area where we think they could improve, and we want to help them. That was one of the themes of the meeting the president had. So I'm sorry, I knew that. Now I understand that's what you're getting at, and that's absolutely right. Let me ask the chairman on the MFO or Sinai.
Senator, I agree with your assessment on ISIS and the Sinai. It is a critical node, and it has to be a part of our strategy, and is a part of our strategy. And in fact, I just came back from a visit to Cairo over the weekend to talk to our Egyptian partners about improving our cooperation in dealing with ISIS, not only in the Sinai but across North Africa.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, you weren't here when I started. I wanted to thank you for your leadership on the Veterans Bill. I had to step out for a press conference for Veterans Affairs, but the Chair is trying to take care of you all that are serving now and everybody that served in the past. And I thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. Vice President Kane.
Be the vice president of your fan club. And I'm sure there's a lot of competition for that role. Let me thank the witnesses for your testimony. And I also just want to compliment you on some tactical successes that you've described in the earlier testimony. The battlefield space of ISIL is shrinking, but it creates new challenges because as they feel that shrinking, they want to do other things that are more asymmetric in other cities around the world to maintain relevance. So that's going to pose all kinds of challenges for us. While I do applaud you for tactical successes, I'm going to just repeat a refrain with the announcement of the escalation of troop presence in Syria. I am deeply concerned about the legal basis for this war, both domestic and international legal basis. On the domestic side, I am in a minority in this body, in Congress, in believing that the 2001 authorization does not provide a legal justification for this war. And I think that there isn't a domestic legal justification unless and until we do an authorization for military force. General Mattis, the former head of CENTCOM, spoke last Friday at the Center for Strategic and International Studies and was harshly critical of Congress for not passing an authorization. And he said, quote, "Worth more than 10 battleships or 5 armored divisions is a sense of American political resolve." I just worry that we haven't sent that sense, and on Congress's shoulders, we haven't sent that sense. General Dunford, you testified about a year ago as Commandant of the Marine Corps for this committee, and I asked you about an authorization and what it might do. And you said, and this is almost a direct quote, "What our men and women need, and it's virtually all that they need, is a sense that what they're doing has meaning, has value, and has the support of the American public." I don't think we've given them that. I don't think we've sent a message of political resolve as the political leadership, as the decision makers contemplated in Article 1 of the Constitution. We've not sent a message of resolve to our troops. We haven't sent that message to our allies. We haven't sent that message to our adversaries. And so I continue to believe that the domestic legal authorization for this war is highly problematic. I want to turn my attention to a second legal issue, which I usually haven't talked about, and that there's got to be international legal basis for war as well. If you are fighting a war on your own soil and you're not invading anybody else's sovereignty, you don't need separate international legal justification for fighting that war. But if you're into the sovereign space of another nation, there not only has to be a domestic legal justification, there's got to be an international legal justification. Now, a common legal justification, one of the most common on the international side, is that you have been invited in by the sovereign nation that wants your help. U.S. action against ISIL in Iraq right now is at the invitation of the Iraqi government. So there is clear international legal justification for all of our activities in Iraq, setting aside the domestic question. I'm sorry to say this, but there is also international legal justification for Russian military activity in Syria because Russia has been invited in by the sovereign government of Syria. We may like it or we may not. We may think it's a bad idea, but in terms of the international legal justification for Russian activity in Syria, they've been invited in by a sovereign government. Russia, through proxies and even through their own forces, is carrying out military operations in Ukraine. That's a violation of international law. It's a clear violation of international law because Ukraine has not invited them in. They are carrying out military operations in a sovereign nation without the support of that sovereign nation, contrary to the wishes of the sovereign nation. But what I struggle with is how can we criticize the Russian incursion into Ukrainian sovereignty when we are carrying out now escalating military operations in Syria without the permission and really even against the will of the sovereign of that nation? I am correct, am I not, that Syria has not invited us to conduct military operations within the nation of Syria?
You're correct. And just to address a couple of the points that you've made, first of all, I want to hasten to say I'm no lawyer, but we do have lawyers. And with respect to the AUMF authorization for the use of military force, I agree with you. I testified in favor of there being such an AUMF. Importantly, because it would signify to the troops that the country's behind them. Now, I think they feel like they're behind them, and the chairman and I try to attest to that. Your visits to the region attest to that, so I think they feel that, but that would have been another way of attesting to that. I am told by the lawyers, and I believe this, that the legal basis for what we're doing exists in both domestic law and international law for everything we're doing. But again, I'm not the expert on that, and couldn't explain to you the ins and outs of it. I also will say that if there's a difference between what we're doing in Syria and what the Russians did in Ukraine, and we're trying to fight real terrorists. We're not trying to destabilize a stable situation. So we're trying to return order and decency, not the other way around. So I don't know what a lawyer would say, but as a common sense answer is there's a big difference.
Of course there is. And I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you. But if I had Russian witnesses on the stand, they would talk about why they're doing what they're doing in the Ukraine. I mean, and I'll just conclude with this, Mr. Chair. At the end of this administration, as a strong friend and supporter of this president, and as a strong friend of everybody around this table, I think we've made a complete hash of the, and that's a diplomatic phrase, of the doctrines of war, both domestic and international. We are engaged in an incursion into the sovereign nation of Syria without their permission, against their will. We're trying to criticize Russia for engaging into an incursion into another nation against their will. And we're asserting as the difference that we're doing something good and they're doing something bad. I agree that we're doing something good. I agree that they're doing something bad. But that's not a limiting principle, because everybody's going to say what they're doing is good. And so at the end of this administration, with the complicity of this Congress, I think we've basically come up with a war doctrine that says wherever and whenever, as long as the president feels that it's a good idea, without Congress even needing to do anything about it. The problem is, if that is the rule, and I think that's become the rule, that's a rule that I think will haunt us domestically under future presidents and Congresses that I could see. And I also think it's a rule that can easily be seized by any other nation to basically justify all kinds of things that are horrible. And so we're only 6 months before the end of the administration, an administration that promised 3 years ago, March of 2013, that they would try to work with Congress to revise the 2001 authorization that is currently being used as a justification for actions not only in Iraq and Syria, but Yemen and Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. There has been virtually no work done to put any limiting principle on that, certainly not in any kind of a negotiation with Congress that I'm aware of. And so we're going to basically be in a position where we've turned a 60-word authorization from 2001 with a lot of administrative gloss that wasn't even in the authorization into an all-purpose wherever, whenever domestic justification. And then we've taken common international principles of law, and basically we've decided that if our motives are okay, we can incur into the sovereignty of another nation because we're doing the right thing. But then that takes away our ability to effectively criticize other nations that get into the sovereignty of other nations, as Russia is doing in the Ukraine. So, Mr. Chair, this is not a subject that we're going to resolve today, but I just, as we reach these new milestones of escalation, I'm just going to keep putting on the record a deep concern about the precedent that we're setting for this nation, but also the example that we're setting for other nations. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kane. On behalf of Chairman McCain, let me recognize Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank Senator Kane for that very powerful and compelling summary of concerns that I share, and I won't give my own version of them because he stated them very well, and you've been here for a long time, and I thank you for being here so patiently and so informatively to this committee. I noted, Mr. Secretary, that there was a note of pride in your voice when you said you were not a lawyer, for which I forgive you.
I only meant that I was a physicist.
There are many days that I wish I were a physicist, and there's no way I could be. So thank you both for your service. I want to explore an issue that I think is extremely important, the evolving military cooperation between Russia and Iran. It may have been mentioned here, but not in depth. There have been reports in recent weeks that have highlighted Russia's shipment of parts, the S-300 air defense system, I believe, to Iran. In addition, Russia and Iran are supposedly in talks over the Sukhoi fighter jet and possible shipment of that weapons platform. If these systems are delivered, clearly there has been a violation of UN Security Council 2231. I'm not an international lawyer, but it seems pretty clear that would be a violation, which requires Security Council approval for the sale of any major combat systems to Iran for the next 5 years. Supplying weapons to Iran is particularly dangerous because it's not done in a vacuum. Supplying weapons reflects a growing partnership that has far-reaching ramifications for Hezbollah, because that is Iran's terrorist proxy. It also benefits, at least indirectly, from Russian arms and military operational experience in Syria. So my question to both of you, may I begin with General Dunford, is what are the implications for Israel if Iran continues to receive military equipment in Russia, and what would the United States have to do to counter it?
Senator, thanks. And I think clearly there are implications for Israel. I've visited now a couple of times here over the last few months, and the Israelis view the developments in Iran with great concern, and that has a lot to do with our continued commitment to ensuring that Israel maintains a qualitative military edge in the theater. And so the implications are that we will continue to work very closely with the Israelis to make sure that they have the capabilities and the capacities. As you know, they now talk about QME-2, meaning not just the capability, but also the capacity to deal with threats in the region. And so I think our commitment to what the Israelis now call QME-2 is really the most appropriate response to the developments in Iran. But I do share your concern, and I know the Israelis do as well.
Secretary Carter, what can be done to stem the flow of arms in this way? Obviously, there are potential diplomatic steps. Are there also military steps that can be taken?
First of all, let me associate myself with the chairman just said, but there are both diplomatic and military steps. I don't mean military steps in the sense of attacking, but I mean in posture. The diplomatic ones I can't speak to, but there is a body of UN Security Council resolutions. They're not just one, there are a number of them. I'm not an expert on that, but I know they do apply, and they should constrain countries that are supplying Iran with dangerous arms because of Iran's other activities in terms of supporting terrorism, in terms of ballistic missile threats and so forth, for which they have been sanctioned and which sanctions were not a part of the Iran nuclear deal. To the military provisions, I'd just say this. This is one of the reasons that I was in the Gulf, and the President asked me to go there before him last week, is to talk to our Gulf partners about fortifying themselves. Now, that wasn't a conversation with Israel, but I've had conversations with Israel as well, also to strengthen their capabilities. We do that in missile defense, lots of other areas, committed to their qualitative military edge, as the chairman indicated. And of course, they have broader concerns than Iran, but Iran is their principal concern. That's the reason, one of the reasons, we have a huge posture in the Middle East, military posture, U.S. military posture. Part of that is ISIL, but the other one is the other eye. ISIL, and then there's Iran, and that's why we're there, and to underscore deterrence, to support our friends and allies, especially including Israel, against Iranian aggression and malign influence. So it's very important.
I take it that this continuing flow of arms, and I would appreciate your views and commitment in this regard, will be taken into account in the negotiations on the memorandum of understanding that are ongoing right now as we speak.
Yes, those discussions are conducted by the White House, but obviously completely informed by the views of myself and the chairman on the military dimensions of it, and extensive discussions that I have with my colleagues, including my good friend, the Defense Minister of Israel, Bogi Ya'alon, and that the chairman has with his counterpart there.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Gentlemen, on behalf of the chairman, let me thank you for your testimony, for your service, and declare that the hearing is adjourned. Thank you very much.